Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Unexpected Emergencies by blueh. Luffy had been alone most of his short life, with no one to love and no one to rely on. This all changed, however, when the Whitebeard pirates stumble upon his lonely little island and take the 4-year-old boy under their wing. Who knew that the little rubber brat would become one of Oyaji's strongest commanders when he grew up? Ha! The Whitebeard pirates sure didn't. Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios!
You're growing old, Thatch, Luffy said brightly, jumping onto his friend's shoulders with a playful laugh. Thatch let out a grunt. Happy birthday. Oof. Thatch skidded a bit, laughing as they both crashed to the deck with a dull thud. Luffy quickly scrambled up and sat on Thatch's chest. The boy's eyes sparkled as he looked down at his longtime friend and brother, practically father, with that look. I'm only getting old cuz brats like you keep jumping on me. Thatch sat up, his grin turning into a small smile when the 16-year-old slid down on his lap. He wrapped his arms around the boy, pulling him into a tight hug. Thank you, Luffy. I really appreciate it. Luffy laughed, taking his own arms and wrapping them around the man's waist. Thatch couldn't help but think about the time all those years ago when he was only a boy, so small and fragile, ready to break under the smallest pressure. He'd sure grown, hadn't he? He's a proud commander, now. Thatch let go of the boy, but Luffy refused to let go of him. Thatch smirked and rolled his eyes as he tugged the boy's hands a bit, only making them wrap tighter around his waist. Come on, Luffy. I've got to go make dinner, yeah? He was surprised when the word dinner didn't even seem to ring up in Luffy's mind. Instead of jumping up and yelling about food, the boy just snorted. No, the other cooks said that they'd take care of it. It's your day off. Luffy grinned up at the man. We're going to party tonight. A party, huh? Thatch laughed. I'd watch out for anything that Ace gives you. He wasn't too happy with the last stunt you pulled on him. Luffy brightened up at the mention of his prank and let out a small laugh. Ace was funny, though. He was all rainbow Y and everything. Cuz you put crayons on him and watched as they melted. It was rather creative, Thatch had to admit. The question was, where did he get the crayons in the first place? Took him 2 hours to try and get the red splatter of the middle of his chest and get the blue out of his hair. Technically, he melted the crayons on himself. Luffy said innocently. I just put them there, I didn't melt them or do anything like that. You know that Ace tends to set himself on fire when he wakes up, though. Thatch let out a laugh, shaking his head fondly at the boy's antics. Still, just watch you back, okay? I don't want to be the one babysitting if someone spikes you drink. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Luffy jumped up, putting his hand on his hat and grinned before rushing off to do God knows what. Thatch just stared at the boy, realizing just how perfect he fit in this family. After all, he was a proud child of the sea. It was a marine ship in the distance, something that had everyone on edge. Most of the crew was on deck, preparing for battle. The sound of clicks and the occasional yell echoed on board. From where he was standing, Luffy could even hear the men below deck, preparing the cannons just in case the situation worsened. Ace walked up from behind the boy, ruffling his already messy hair and nudging his shoulder playfully. Luffy turned his head to face the fire user, a grin on his face. Despite the lax appearance, the 2nd Division commander could see the tense lines that covered his body. How dangerous do you think they'll be? Luffy asked, eyeing the marine ship. It was close to firing range now. They could just make out the tiny specks of the Marines running around deck, preparing themselves for whatever was to come. The Whitebeard pirates would not attack first. They would wait to see if the ship is friendly or if it's going to attack. If they started attacking, then, they'll fight back without a second thought. Dunno, Ace answered, shaking his head, his gray eyes losing the remaining humor quickly. After all, it was war. Emotion will only slow you down. Marines are strange. They always change tactics, always change men, always change ships. It's annoying, especially when you can't predict what they're going to do. For all we know, it could be Garp coming for yet another visit. Garp's weird. Luffy huffed, rubbing the spot when he got hit every time the old marine comes for a visit, and his personality changes fast. Ace chuckled, shaking his head fondly. At least you didn't grow up with him and his training. Me and Sabo were practically dead each night. He'd throw us up into trees, bushes, anything he could find really. I think his favorite spot to throw me is the mast. Luffy answered, thinking back to the many times that he'd been thrown into the wooden frame. He keeps using hockey whenever he's here and it really hurts, Ace. At least he has trouble catching you. Ace retorted. Marco and Thatch seem to take it as a joke. They'll throw me out on deck when I'm trying to hide or hint to Garp where I'm hiding. For you. Well, let's just say that they're a little more protective. Thatch was pissed the last time Garp was here. He threw me off the boat, Luffy remembered, shaking his head. Thatch came and saved me afterward. Yeah. What a load of bull. He was cut off by a high-pitched humming of a cannonball right before it landed. Distantly he heard the roar of the crew as they lifted up their swords, calling out Oyaji's name. Watch out, Vista was on the scene before Ace could even move his feet. Using his favored sword, the commander cut the cannonball cleanly in half, smirking as he landed and the cannonball sailed overhead and into the water on the opposite side of the ship. The pirates let out another roar, crowding at the edge of the ship. No commander made a move. Fosa muttered something under his breath, and rolled his eyes. Ace had to wonder, just for a second, what the man was thinking about. The Marines let out a cry of their own, drowned out as cannon fires ran out from the hull of the Moby. Most of the cannon shots were misses and others were deflected, but a few did hit, damaging the mast and railway of the blue ship. They were close now, close enough that any second they'd be able to board the Moby. The pirates were ready for them though. With years of training and experience that far exceeded these rookie Marines, the pirates were confident that they'd win yet another battle. The two hulls touched, the pirates jumping across the ship before the Marines could even lower the planks. In the crowd, Ace noticed Luffy's red vest disappear through all the people and rolled his eyes. The boy probably wasn't going to fight, just keep an eye on his division and knock out an occasional Marine that might cause a problem. The other commanders, minus Izo, who was fighting with Luffy to make sure the brat didn't get in too much trouble, and Namur, who was screwing with the currents under the Marine's boat, stayed on the Moby, being Oyaji's last line of defense. They'd occasionally knock a Marine, that his ship brothers had missed, back into the ocean or away from their ship. Other than that, they were to stay stationary the whole time and just watch. This was training for the rookies, basically. It gave them experience and made them stronger, both traits that were needed on Whitebeard's ship. Sometime during the battle, Vista had walked over to Ace, his eyes still glued on the other ship. The Marines' numbers were dwindling down now and Ace knew that it wouldn't take much more time until the bastards retreated. They did this once a week, if they were lucky, so everyone was good at knowing when the Marines would just turn around and run. It was common for them. It wasn't until he heard Luffy shout, "Pistol," from the other side of the deck that he stared paying attention. He glanced over at Vista, an eyebrow raised. He got the same look back from the swordsman. Ace wasn't necessarily worried, but he knew that Luffy wouldn't use his devil fruit power unless it was absolutely needed. Plus, the boy wouldn't dare to interrupt a fight unless it was clear that they were losing. A scream broke through the air and cheering could be heard, though Ace couldn't tell if it was Marines or his Nakamoys cry out another attack and then Izo's voice yelling something. It didn't sound like an attack name, so Ace calmed down a bit. If Izo wasn't in the battle, then that meant that it was just a normal battle. Suddenly, the noise stopped altogether. Ace raced forward, hands reaching out and grasping onto the rail, looking up at the ship and waiting for something. Anything. To happen. To make the noise start up again. His knuckles were turning white and just as Ace was about to jump over and help, a large explosion rocked the Marine's ship. Shouts of the Whitebeard pirates were heard as they jumped back to their respected ship, laughing, whooping and playfully shoving each other as they celebrated yet another victory. Izo and Luffy were the last to jump from the boat, stepping out the railing and landing on the deck. Luffy had an injured man, someone that Ace recognized to be from Kingdu's division, over his shoulder, grinning like an idiot. Izo was still smiling, but something in his expression told everyone that something had happened. The marine ship was long gone by now around the horizon line. They could no longer hear the cries of the Marines as they helped their fallen comrades or the cursing that spewed from their mouths. The only sound was the happy cries of his brothers and sisters as they filtered around deck, checking their siblings for injuries. The nurses rushed over and quickly took the injured man off of Luffy's shoulder, thanking him for saving the man. Luffy just waved them off and bounded over wearing the same happy smile on his face. Izo followed the boy, arms crossed over his chest as he looked like he was trying to persuade Luffy to do something. Luffy, however, had other ideas as he kept shaking his head saying something that seemed to only piss off Izo more. When Luffy was close enough, Ace noticed that his red shirt was slightly torn and a darker color was seeping into the fabric. The fire user's eyes narrowed, arms crossed as the boy approached. Luffy didn't seem to notice or didn't care until Ace lashed out, grabbing the boy's other shoulder and pulling him closer to inspect what he assumed was a wound. Izo rolled his eyes as Luffy struggled, eyes wide. Told you he'd notice. Shut up, Luffy retorted. His eyes glanced back at Ace and Vista, smiles slowly slipping from his face. Ace, I'm fine, really. Let me go, please. What's this? Ace's voice was ice, ignoring the exasperated look from Izo and Vista and a mutter of brother complex. It's nothing. There was just this guy who was pretty strong and he sliced my shoulder when I was helping out. Luffy looked at the cross-dresser as if he were begging for help, eyes wide and full of innocence. Izo, used to the look by now, just shrugged and waved him off. Luffy stuck his tongue out at the betrayal. Go to the nurses, Luffy. Ace. Luffy whined, yanking his shoulder from the fire user's grasp. I'm fine. I'm fine. I just need some meat and sleep and I'll be good as new. Meat heals everything. Oh no, Ace let out a barking laugh. No, you are going to the nurses even if I had to drag you there myself. Whoa, Ace, I'm fine. Luffy tried to struggle out of his grasp but couldn't budge, earning snickers from Izo and Vista who were watching the whole scene with amused expressions. Help. You're on your own, Luffy. Vista said with a smile, walking away so he could go check up on his division. Izo just took one look at the youth and shook his head, following behind Vista. I'm not dealing with Ace, sorry. Better luck next time. You guys suck. Luffy pouted, still trying to get his arm out of his big brother's grasp. He let out another yelp when Ace decided that he had enough and lifted the boy into his shoulders, ignoring the demands for Luffy to be put down immediately. Ace, what are you doing? Put me down, put me down. We're getting you medical attention, idiot, Ace grumbled, his eyes still narrowed. Ace, I'm fine. Luffy tried to protest for the last time, but the words fell deaf to the fire user's ears. His older brother was too stubborn to change his mind. By the time the Moby arrived to aid their allies, they knew it was already too late. The battle was over, with bodies floating in the ocean. The Marines had led a swift and dangerous attack. The only thing they left behind were their dead. Luffy watched as Oyaji closed his eyes. He knew it hurt Pops more than anything to see his sons die, even if they weren't part of the main crew. Their allies were still their friends and they still sought to protect them, and when they failed, their allied ships burned in the sea. Help the wounded, Oyaji eventually spoke, his tone flat. Luffy wasn't the only one to flinch, looking at his father with worry. Fosa, who leaned against the rail, sighed and closed his eyes as well. We will bury the dead. All of the bodies? Rikuyo asked. All of them, Whitebeard said. Go. The commanders dispersed, finding any of the living that they could. By the time they accounted for everyone, the sun was beginning to set, casting red and orange streaks in the sky. Luffy pulled the last body from one of the burning ships before placing it in the growing pile. He dripped from sweat, his body covered in blood that was not his own. They had buried the bodies, both Marine and pirate, and wished them well. Tears were shed as his siblings grieved the loss of their friends. The downside to being a commander, Luffy found out, was that everyone looked up to them when they needed support. To stay high when everyone else is low. Luffy wanted to cry, but he couldn't. Oyaji, Flamenco approached their grieving father. One of our ships, the Moby Fore, she's been damaged, she can't sail anymore. Whitebeard stood, seemingly untouchable in the soft light. It cast shadows on the deck. Then we will bury her as well. Flamenco nodded and sighed. Luffy knew that he had been one of the ones that built the Mobies, 6 of them in total. The Moby, Moby 1, Moby 2, Moby 3, Moby 4 and Moby 5. Those ships had been with the crew longer than most of the crew had. To lose one of them was just as bad as losing a family member. Luffy wandered over to the rail, stopping next to Marco. Marco gave him a soft smile that he returned before watching as Flamenco took a small boat out towards the downed ship. Armed with nothing more than a torch, Luffy watched as the man said his goodbyes. "The sea can be unforgiving," Marco said softly. Luffy nodded in agreement. Flamenco held up the torch, the ship catching fire immediately. Even though she was smaller than the Moby, she was still an impressive ship. The crew that sailed on her back loved her. Luffy could tell. He could hear their cries even from here. Luffy closed his eyes. The Whitebeard pirates had lost too much today. "I'm sorry." His eyes snapped open and he jolted to the side, not expecting to hear a voice. Marco glanced at him, but didn't comment. He stared at the sea, thinking that he made it up. "I'm so sorry." Luffy's eyes widened as he stared at the burning ship. "She's crying." Marco turned to him and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "She's crying," Luffy repeated, almost in a daze. The voice continued, repeating fears and regrets. "She doesn't want to die. She wants to take us on more adventures, but she knows she's not going to make it. She's sad." "Luffy, what are you?" "She's apologizing to her crew," Luffy continued. "She loves them more than anything, she just wants them to be safe. She's happy too, that she got to make memories with all of them." Marco eventually followed his eyes, only for them to land on the small whale figurehead that was slowly disappearing beneath the waves. "The ship? You're talking about the Moby 4? Luffy nodded his head slowly. "You can hear her?" Luffy turned to Marco, eyebrows furrowed. "You can't?" "None of us can." "But she's—" Luffy stared out at the sea just as the ship disappeared completely. "Luffy, you can hear the ship." Luffy flinched when Marco put a hand on his shoulder. He df hurt in the man's eyes, turning away from the burning ship. It was too much, too soon. He could hear her cries. He could hear the cries of her crew. He could hear the cries of the other ships. He didn't know why, but didn't care. It hurt more than anything to watch her go down. There was so much going in his head that it hurt. It felt like he was getting torn to pieces. He grabbed the side of his head, ignoring Marco as the man tried to get his attention. I'm going inside." Luffy didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to hear it. He just wanted everything to stop. He turned and walked towards his room. The Moby 4's last words were stuck in head like a broken den mushi. "I was happy. Thank you, for sailing with me." The sound of footsteps could be heard as Luffy jumped across the roofs, looking for some of his division. They'd gone missing about an hour ago and Luffy was sent out to go and find them and bring them back. They were, after all, his responsibility. Plus, he was getting a little bit worried himself. This was a pirate town and although they were in paradise and Luffy trusted his crewmates, some of the rookie captains here could knock them to the ground like flies. Yells echoed in the streets as yet another skirmish happened in the dirt road. He could hear the laughing of a voice. "These are Whitebeard pirates. How pathetic. And here I thought that I'd actually get a challenge." Another, much smoother voice interrupted the grumbling. "I wouldn't get so worked up, Eustace Yaw. After all, they're just underlings." "Piss off, rookies." A voice that Luffy recognized yelled, obviously sounding frustrated and angry. "We don't have time for the likes of you. Get going or our commander is going to show up soon. He'll kick your sorry asses." My, the second voice said, sounding more amused than threatened. "How rude. We were just having a little fun, right, Eustace Yaw?" "Shut up, Trafalgar. What the hell are you doing here anyway?" The first voice growled, sounding close to attacking the other. By now, Luffy could just barely make out the figures. The 5 missing from his division that he easily recognized, facing off what seemed like 2 separate pirate crews. The first man was scowling at the other with flaming red hair and his body was covered in metal. The other was much more relaxed, smirking at the redhead as if the whole situation amused him. He was tapping his long sword on his shoulder. A few dozen men stood behind them, glaring at one another as they took sides. "I'm simply waiting for their—" The second man gestured to the Whitebeard pirates who were still growling and holding up their swords as if to threaten the 2 captains away. "Commander to show up. I've been dying to meet one." Well, Luffy shouted, gaining everyone's attention as he jumped from the building, landing in front of his division while holding his hat on his head. He was grinning as he slid to a stop, only feet away from the two men that were harassing his family. It seems you don't have to wait. Commander Luffy. He heard the happy shouts of his nakama behind him and his grin widened. He straightened his back and stood a full height. The redhead seemed shocked, though tried not to show it, and the black-haired male was still smirking. Luffy snorted, his face quickly losing its grin. His dark eyes narrowed, even though he knew that he shouldn't fight them unless he absolutely had to. I don't appreciate it when people threaten my family. He's a kid. He heard the redhead mumble before shaking his head. Ma, whatever, the easier it'll be for us then, right? Luffy crossed his arms over his chest and snorted. This is why he hated being in paradise. It was full of overconfident rookies and a bunch of others who thought they had a chance at taking down one of Whitebeard's men. Underestimating people on the Grand Line will get you killed. Funny, coming from a brat like you, the redhead said, nonchalantly, rolling his eyes as if this were some big joke. Even the other man let out an amused snort. I'm 16, Luffy snapped, his hands curling into fists. Then he closed his eyes and unclenched them, telling himself that rookies weren't worth it. Feeling that this situation might escalate quickly, Luffy turned his head towards his division, being sure to still keep his eyes on his opponents, and said, "Get back to the ship. I can handle things here." They took one look at him before turning and running back, laughing and shouting things that Luffy was sure were about him. A small smile graced his lips and rolled his eyes. His division was very enthusiastic. His smiles slipped when he turned back to the pirates, glad that they hadn't attacked them while he was talking. "If you choose to attack me, then go ahead. I'll kick your asses, but attacking any Whitebeard pirate is considered a declaration of war against my family." "Don't worry, Mugiwara-ya," the black-haired guy said, his smirk widening. "We're not here to attack you just yet. We haven't introduced ourselves yet, have we? How rude. I am Trafalgar Law and the brute next to me is Eustace Ya. I guess you could call him Kid, though." The names clicked into place in Luffy's mind and he put his hands behind his head. "You're those super rookies that are stirring up trouble for the government." "Oh, Traffle. How the hell was he supposed to pronounce a name like that? He'd just call him Traffy?" said, curiosity lining his gaze. "You've heard of us? I'm honored, Mugiwara-ya. Haruta and Rikuyo were talking about you the other day." Luffy answered, a grin appearing on his face when he thought of the bitching match that ensued between the two commanders. "I don't read the papers often." "Well then that's rather disappointing, isn't that right, Eustace Ya?" "Shut the hell up, bastard," Kid said, harshly. For a moment, Luffy was sure he was going to attack the other man, but held back the last minute. How barbaric. Traffy didn't seem to be affected by the intentions at all. His gaze returned to Luffy as if he was thinking about something. "Having a bounty so young. You're almost like that woman, Nico Robin, was it?" Something flashed in the back of Luffy's mind. The image of a young woman with pain that she shouldn't have. Someone that was nice to him and accepted him for who he was. Someone that didn't care about the labels that were put on him. Bastard, monster, devil. "Don't talk bad about Robin," he growled. Robin was his nakama and no one talked bad about his nakama. "I never did," Taffy replied, ignoring the mutter from Eustace. "I was simply comparing the two of you together. Though, for your reaction, I have to say that my curiosity is piqued. Do you know her?" "Yes," Luffy answered, simply glancing over his shoulder in the direction that their boat was anchored. It was time that he stared heading back. "I met her a few years ago. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go." Traffy chuckled, watching him leave silently. "I look forward to our future meetings, Mugiwara-ya." Luffy was glad to be back in the New World. He really missed the place when they'd go off and explore paradise. He knew that Oyaji needed to check up on his territories, but he really hated the arrogant bastards that covered the whole ocean. Those said bastards were filtered out by the time they get to the New World, but they do see one on occasions. He hummed as he skipped along beside Ace and Thatch, just enjoying their company. The island that they landed on was rather boring with nothing really to do. Apparently, it was one of the most peaceful islands in the whole New World. The only issue that the townspeople faced was the giant forest near the south side of the island. Apparently, anyone who went in there never came out. So, of course, Ace and Luffy wanted to explore it. The only reason they hadn't bolted to the forest was the fact that Thatch had Luffy trapped and wasn't letting go, and Ace didn't like exploring without his family. It took away the fun in finding something exciting when he couldn't share it with everyone was whining and flailing around in his brother's grip. Let me go. I want to go explore the cool forest. Maybe, we'll find meat and bring it back. Right, Ace? Yeah, Ace said, nodding his head. Come on, Thatch. You're being a stick in the mud. Aren't you supposed to be the fun brother? 'Cause right now I'm tempted to go find Marco. Both of you are big babies. Thatch rolled his eyes but did not let go of Luffy's head. Instead, he continued to walk down the street as if he wasn't being bit by the 16-year-old commander. I thought you were hungry and now you want to go away from the food? We can find something to eat in the forest. Ace reasoned, shaking his head. It's not like we don't know how. I've cooked plenty of things in my life. All of it ends up being burned. Thatch rolled his eyes and was about to say something else when something caught the corner of Luffy's eye and he tensed up. No longer struggling or walking for that matter. Both Thatch and Ace stopped as well, looking around. It was then that Luffy noticed that they were the only ones on the street. There were no people, no shops, no nothing. The only thing that stood was some old buildings that looked like they'd fall apart at any time. A gust of wind blew through the place, making strange whistling noises. Thatch's grip loosened and Luffy pulled his head out from under his arm just as another white and blue flash caught the corner of his eyes once again. Ace apparently saw it, as well, letting out a feral growl and lighting his shoulders on fire. Marines. A low chuckle brought the commander's attention to a lone figure in the streets. He was huge and bulky, wearing a Hawaiian shirt with a marine cape fluttering in the wind. Luffy couldn't read the back, so he had no idea what rank this man was, but by the way Thatch and Ace tensed up even more and the power emitting from the man, he was nothing to laugh about. Ace? Thatch? He whispered, breaking the silence. Who's he? Instead of answering, both Thatch and Ace stepped in front of the boy as if they were protecting him. Luffy gaped at both of their backs. He could handle himself. He didn't need to be protected. Fire exploded around the commanders, making a circle. Luffy could feel the blaze licking at the back of his ankles, but wasn't bothered. It was Ace's fire and Ace's fire would never hurt them. But it worried him, their reaction. Thatch pulled out his sword, pointing it at the man with a deadly gleam in his eyes. Hello, Akainu. Luffy, run. Ace said immediately, to the boy after the pieces clicked into place in his mind. They were not stupid. Both Thatch and Ace knew that Luffy was strong but an admiral was over his head. Hell, it might even be too much for the two seasoned commanders even if they did work together. If they could get Luffy back to the ship and let Oyaji know. Then, they might have a chance in this battle. Oyaji was stronger than Akainu and wouldn't let the Marine Admiral touch any one of his sons. But, Luffy tried to protest, his eyes wide. He took a step back, almost stepping on the circle that Ace had made to protect them from the weaker Marines who had no doubt surrounded them. Luffy, this time it was Thatch, catching onto Ace's plan immediately. Get out of here. Get back to the ship and tell Oyaji. Luffy sent them one more worried glance, his shoulders tense, but it didn't look like he was going to protest. Ace was thankful for that, at least. Luffy knew his limits and knew that Akainu would kick his ass easily if given the chance. Without another glance, Luffy jumped over the ring of fire and sprinted as fast as he could, which was really damn fast, down the dirt roads, kicking up dust. Some shots rang out from the alleyways and the rooftops. Ace could only guess that the other Marines were trying to stop him. Do not think it will be so easy, son of dragon. Akainu's cold voice brought all the attention back to him. Ace and Thatch went rigid. The only ones who knew about Luffy's father were the commanders and they'd never tell anyone. How could the Marines know about such a safely guarded secret? The Marine Admiral brought a fist up and it easily shifted to magma before Ace or Thatch could even move. With a roar, the Marine launched an attack at the younger, missing him by mere inches. The attack connected with the ground and exploded, sending Luffy flying into a building with a surprised yelp. Leave! Ace jumped up, flaming fist raised to stop another attack from hurting his little brother, Luffy alone. The Marine easily brought up an arm and blocked the attack with a disapproving scowl. It might not have hurt the man, but it did distract him long enough for Luffy to get up and run once again, this time able to get out of range and sprint back to the ship. Ace jumped back, diminishing the fire circle that he'd created. Thatch glanced at him with a nod, gripping his sword tightly as a black armor surrounded it. With fist and sword raised, they jumped in the air with battle cries. They would protect their family no matter what. Luffy could feel the burns on his arms and chest as he ran. Every time he moved, he held in a hiss of pain. He kept telling himself that he'd been through worse and his brothers were still back there, risking their lives so he could get away. The faster he got back to the ship, the better of a chance Ace and Thatch will have. Marines were yelling behind him to stop, that he was a coward for running, but Luffy didn't care. His brothers' lives were much more important than his pride. As long as he got to the ship, they'd be fine. Oyaji could handle anyone. He was the strongest man in the world. A gun rang out and a bullet whizzed past his hair, cutting off a few strands. He didn't have time to deal with these bastards. Thinking quickly, Luffy suddenly turned into an alley, confusing the Marines. Using the confusion to his advantage, he jumped on the roof, plowing through Marines quickly. Up there, one Marine shouted, aiming his gun and firing a shot. It caught Luffy in the leg and he stumbled, but quickly caught himself. Sea stone, but bullets wouldn't hurt him. They couldn't, not when Thatch and Ace's lives were riding on his back. His observation haki was at its limits with so many figures around him. He didn't notice the dagger that was thrown at him until it was too late. He hissed in pain when it grazed his side, bleeding immediately. It was a small wound, but enough that it might hinder him in a later battle. The last thing he needed was more unneeded injuries. Finally, the ship came into view. Its whalehead standing proud and tall against the ocean waves as the waves crashed against the hull. He could make out all the crewmates going around deck, laughing and joking around, blissfully unaware of the impending danger. Luffy wanted to shout at them, yell that this wasn't the time, they were in more danger than they'd been in a long time. A stray thought crossed his mind. Where were all the townspeople? He'd seen none since Akainu showed up. The boy narrowed his eyes. Was this a trap from the beginning? And if it was, how long had it been planned out? His sandaled feet clicked as he ran on the wooden roofs. He could no longer hear the Marines yelling or gunshots behind him and took that as a sign that he'd lost them. With one giant bound, Luffy launched himself off the roof, sailing through the air and landing on the deck, ignoring the startled stares from the other crewmates and the scream that would have normally been funny. Blood dripped from his wound as he gasped for air, standing up and running towards Oyaji's seat in the middle of the deck. Luffy! Someone cried out his name and Luffy whipped his head to the side, seeing Marco jogging towards him, concern written all over his features. Luffy paid him no mind. He could listen when Oyaji heard the news first. Luffy stumbled, pain lacing through his back as the burns were moved. He quickly caught himself, still gasping for air. Oyaji! He yelled rather breathlessly, his eyes wide. The giant man looked down at his son for a second before scooping him up and depositing the young commander into his large lap. Akainu, Admiral Sakazuki is here. Gasps were heard around the deck and everyone dropped what they were doing to listen. An eerie silence washed over the deck as they waited for their father's reaction. Akainu, his voice was emotionless and a blank look crossed his face. A large finger came and felt the burns along Luffy's arm, earning a wince from the younger. The great man suddenly stood up, causing Luffy to slide off of his lap and onto the wooden deck. Ace and Thatch, Whitebeard said, grabbing his weapon from the side of his seat. The others took this as a sign of battle and raced off to grab their own weapons. They're still fighting Akainu, yes? Luffy nodded, ignoring the nurses as they scurried around, patching up the bleeding wound on his side and putting a clear sticky substance on his burns. The young commander stood up, met with protests by the nurses as they ordered him to sit back down, as they were not done treating him. Oyaji's eyes narrowed. Then, we must go help them. Most of the pirates had gathered back up of deck, holding swords, guns, daggers, anything really. They were all tense and ready. They knew that in this battle many would fall to the hands of the enemy. Luffy. The commander looked up at being addressed, staring into the eyes of his father. Do you think you can lead us to the place where Ace and Thatch are? Yes. Luffy turned his back to the giant man. They were going to save the two, no matter what. After all, Luffy would never let his brothers die. Oof. Thatch grunted as he was sent into yet another tree by the Admiral's fists. Ace wasn't doing much better, smashing through a rock not a moment later. Fresh blood dripped down his head, but he still stood up, Ace following close behind. They'd managed to drive the Admiral to the forest on the outskirts of the town. He was more worried about dodging the Admiral's attacks, and quite frankly, Thatch didn't want his insides burned to a crisp. "Damn," Ace muttered beside the commander. Eyes narrowed as they watched their opponent getting ready to launch another attack. He raised his fist, lighting it on fire with a frown that illuminated by the dim light. "There's no end to this. It'd be great if we had some backup." "They'll come soon," Thatch answered, immediately jumping to the side as a giant ball of magma rushed past him, exploding in the distance and sending him tumbling so he was leaning on his elbows, coughing up blood. "They'll be here soon," he whispered, almost as if he were trying to reassure himself. The one thing he was glad for is the fact that Luffy was not here. Because even if they died, right here, right now, their little brother would be safe. Oyaji wouldn't let anyone hurt the boy, even if it meant him protecting with his own life. In fact, Thatch would be surprised if Oyaji, or Marco for the matter, would let the boy come at all. After all, even if he was a commander, he wasn't ready for this yet. "Pathetic," Akainu grumbled, rolling his eyes when Thatch pushed himself off the ground, picking up his sword that had flew just inches from his body. The Marine looked a hell of a lot better than the two commanders, just supporting a small cut on his left arm where Thatch had gotten a lucky shot and a slight bruise on the side of his face when Ace had hit him with haki. His flames weren't really helping in the situation since Akainu is magma, Whitebeard's crew is lacking the strength they once held. Though I would say that the old man has been getting weaker with each passing day. "Shut up. Don't insult Oyaji," Ace shouted, eyes narrowed. Fire raced along his shoulders as if it were a testament of his anger. Thatch wanted to shout at him that this wasn't the time for his fire to get out of hand, that he needed to focus on his attacks rather than words, but knew it was useless. Thatch knew that he held just the same amount of anger that Ace had. Akainu wasn't amused, raising his fist to the sky. He closed his eyes. Ace and Thatch shared a glance, knowing if he completed this attack, it'd be hard to survive. The sheer power radiating from the man was on a completely different level than before. The Admiral's eyes snapped open, a triumphant smirk placed on his lips. "Die pirates." The magma bubbled, squirting everywhere, and Thatch found himself moving. Glancing at the Marine Admiral now, he knew it would be futile. There was no way the 4th Division commander would reach him in time. Was this the end? The man opened his mouth, turning and facing the sky. The man's fist was completely covered in lava now, making Thatch want to flinch, but he didn't. With one leap, the commander surged for the Marine, only missing him by mere centimeters. "Ryu. Stay away from my brothers." All of a sudden, Akainu wasn't there anymore. Thatch's eyes glanced up, catching the sight of the Marine Admiral being sent through several trees before stopping. A lone figure stood in the forest, the wind rustling his head as he glared at the man with so much hatred that Thatch was glad the boy was on their side. Letting out a sigh of relief, he closed his eyes, just listening to the sounds around him. "Luffy. Attack." Whitebeard's booming voice echoed throughout the forest as the Marines stared in horror as a boy no older than 16 sent their leader into a tree. "Oyaji!" Ace let out a happy cry and his siblings rushed around him. The pirates took full advantage of the confusion, whooping and raising their swords, letting out fierce battle cries. They chopped down Marines, one after another, yet more always seemed to fill the empty space. It was like a never-ending cycle of life and death. "Ace!" He looked up from his position against the tree to see Luffy jogging over to him, fresh white bandages on his arms. The boy held out his hand, helping the older to his feet. Ace grinned, wiping the blood from the side of his mouth and shaking his head fondly. "Sorry it took so long. We had to track you down because you weren't in the town anymore." Ace shook his head. "We drove him out into the forest so he wouldn't hurt the townspeople." Luffy frowned at him, clearly miffed, though Ace doubted it was because of the war that was raging around them. "There aren't any people in town. It was like they all disappeared. We didn't see anyone while searching for you." Ace sighed, slouching his shoulders a bit. This day just kept getting worse and worse. "Trap? Trap." Luffy agreed. "Wonderful." Ace punched a Marine away when he tried to attack the fire user while Luffy just laughed like it was the best thing in the world. With a flick of the wrist and a little fire, Ace launched himself into the fray, taking out any Marines that he could touch or get his fire on. He made sure to stick close to Luffy, not wanting the boy to get more hurt than he already was. The man glanced at the bandages that were no doubt covering up the burns that he'd got earlier. "It's your fault," a voice screamed in his mind, making him want to shout at it to just shut up because this wasn't the time. The battle that was slowly becoming an all-out war, and right now all he wanted to do was protect his family, protect his little brother. A loud roar and several screams caused Ace to glance to his left. He temporarily paused in his attack to make sense of what was happening. A pillar of magma engulfed several of his crewmates, ending their lives almost instantaneously. The pirates around their dead growled as a figure rose from the ashes like a demon. "That hurt, brat." Akainu's harsh gaze landed on the youngest commander. Luffy glared back at him, malice clearly visible in the younger's eyes. The admiral tore his eyes away from Luffy and glared at Whitebeard with the same expression. Akainu stood tall and strong as nearby Marines flocked to him like a beacon. "I've come to eliminate the son of Dragon and Gold D. Roger," he announced, his voice carrying through the whole forest. "No," Ace screamed in his head, eyes wide. His stomach seemed to be doing flips inside of his body and his head didn't feel much better. No. He barely registered the fact that Luffy was glancing in his direction, worry evident on his face. Ace ignored the boy for the time being, knowing that Marco, Thatch, Luffy and Oyaji were the only ones that knew his darkest secret. Whispers broke through the forest, both pirates and Marines glancing at each other in confusion. They knew about Luffy's father, but had no clue that the son of Gold D. Roger was aboard the ship. Whitebeard narrowed his eyes along with the commanders. Ace closed his eyes when he heard Whitebeard growl, something that he hadn't heard in years. After all, it took a lot to get the man mad. "You might know them as your 17th commander, Mugiwara no Luffy, and your 2nd Division commander, Hiken no Ace," Akainu shouted, and it felt like the world that Ace had tried so hard to build came crashing down with a single sentence. Hundreds of eyes turned to him and Luffy. Pirates and Marines wore the same, shocked expressions. "Whitebeard," Akainu shouted again, drawing the attention back to him. "The blood of 2 demons runs deep within your ship. You've taken in the son of your enemy, there." "I know," Whitebeard roared across the field, raising his weapon of choice and sending it slamming back on the ground, causing shockwaves that even Ace had trouble finding his balance. Anger practically radiated off of the man in waves and his eyes turned dark. "But you have no right to badmouth them. They're my sons. A father's sin doesn't carry on to his children." There was silence on the field was almost tangible. Then the Whitebeard pirates raised their weapons and roared their agreement for Ace and Luffy were their brothers. It didn't matter who their fathers are, they were the sons of Whitebeard. "Oyaji." "Everyone," Ace whispered, holding a hand up to his mouth as tears gathered in his eyes. The giant man lumbered toward the admiral, intent on taking the man's life. Luffy, not really understanding what was going on, continued to take out Marines at supersonic speed, knocking the men unconscious before they could even turn. Akainu looked at everyone on the field with disgust clearly evident on his face. He lunged at Whitebeard. "Then you are a moron, Whitebeard." Whitebeard simply raised his weapon, eyes filled with hatred and rage. The older man threw the Marine to the ground like he was a simple doll, raising his weapon back up and slamming it down only Ai's face. "I should kill you right here and now." The giant man ignored when Akainu scrambled to his feet, an angry scowl across his face. "But for people like you, your pride is more important than your life, correct? Then we shall show you a humiliating defeat." "Shit, Luffy," Ace growled, punching another Marine across the wet grass. They'd been pushed back away from everyone else when the Marines thought it would be a great idea to abandon the fights they were in and attack the 2 commanders instead. To Ace, it was just annoying, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. These were still high-ranking Marines. A mistake could end his life. He had seen the look in Akainu's eyes. He'd seen the hatred and the rage that flared around him every time he attacked Oyaji. It was clear by his body language that killing Whitebeard wasn't what he was really here for. What he was really here for was... Ace grimaced, flexing his muscles and shaking his head to rid himself of those thoughts and, instead, focused on keeping an eye out for Luffy, who was still fighting beside him. There was no doubt that this was going to be in the news, though, the idea still made Ace's stomach flip. Having his worst secret revealed to the world. Having everyone who he ever knew look at him with a completely new image? All he was going to do was stand in his old man's shadow. He was no longer Hyken no Ace, Whitebeard's second commander and wanted for his devastating reputation and impressive bounty. No, he was the son of Gold D. Roger. Wanted for the evil blood in his veins and the fact that his so-called daddy happened to be the last pirate king. He peered over at Luffy again, his eyes softening. Luffy. Well, Luffy was different. Luffy didn't care about his dad, didn't care to even learn who the man was. Luffy was still Luffy even though his father happened to be someone that was hated by the world. Ace just wished he could be like that. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Ace focused on the battle in front of him. Dodging and swerving between the Marines, making his way over to Luffy. He jumped up in the air, over the confused Marines and landed so his back now faced Luffy's back. This isn't going too well, he noted. No, Luffy agreed with him, rolling his shoulder and sending out another punch. We need to try and get back to the others, they'd probably be worried about now. Yeah, well. Ace glanced at the Marines in front of them, looking like a giant ocean of blue and white. Honestly. How many Marines can they fit on a ship? He would think that it would take hundreds of ships to fit this many Marines, yet they only came on about 2 or 3. I think that's easier said than done. Some cries of happiness from the Marines could be heard throughout the forest. The Marines that were just attacking the 2 commanders back off, opening a line for a lone figure to approach them. Ace's blood ran cold. My. This makes things easier. Akainu. Luffy spat out, unconsciously taking a step back. Ace simply narrowed his eyes even further when Akainu waved off the nearby Marines, sending them back the way they came. The Marines hurried to obey, running off and leaving the 3 alone in just a few short minutes. That's better, Akainu said, cracking his knuckles and walking forward. It was difficult to get away from that captain of yours, but I managed. The old man's going senile. Don't talk about Oyaji like that, Luffy snarled. The man took a step closer and both Luffy and Ace growled at him, shifting so their postures were ready to attack at any moment. Ace could feel his fire licking right below his skin, ready to explode in an instant. You bastard. You have no right to talk, Gold D. Ace. Akainu replied smoothly. He seemed to take joy in the slight flinch when Ace understood what he was implying. I doubt that the Whitebeard pirates would accept you since they now know the blood that runs in your veins. I've heard the rumors that they already know of your heritage, Mugiwara, so I cannot see your future. It won't matter, though, since I'm going to kill you both right here and right now, anyways. Like hell. Luffy suddenly shouted, jumping up in the air and preparing to send a punch towards Akainu's figure. The Marine simply sidestepped the attack with an uninterested look on his face and grabbed the hand that had stretched, throwing the boy over his shoulder and slamming him onto the ground. I expected more, Mugiwara, the Marine stated, nonchalantly. Bastard. Luffy growled out, positioning himself so he could glare at the man. He then used his hand and propelled himself upward, landing gracefully on the balls of his feet a few yards away. Using the Marine's distraction to his advantage, Ace sprinted forward, letting out a war cry. Fire surrounded his fist as he made contact with the man's shoulder, sending him stumbling back a few steps. Akainu hissed, sending an angry scowl at the fire user. Ace couldn't help but smirk back, lifting up his fist as if he were daring the man to come back for another injury. Not bad, the Marine grudgingly admitted, dusting his Hawaiian shirt off. You both have potential to become a real threat to the government, but you're too inexperienced now to make a difference. Luffy huffed at that and Ace couldn't help but agree. They might have been relatively young, but that didn't mean they were inexperienced. Luffy's been a pirate his whole life and Ace has been one even longer than that. They've had plenty of experience on this giant sea. The Marine turned slightly, his left hand shifting into magma. Now, are you ready to finish this, pirates? Marco, Thatch called across the field, running towards the Phoenix with a frantic look on his face. What? Marco's voice came out rather snappy, though the bird couldn't be bothered with his tone at the moment. He simply watched the 4th Division commander regain his breath, trying to say something but failing miserably. Thatch gasped for some more air, blood leaking out the side of his mouth along with several other injuries that littered around his body. Ace and Luffy. He was cut off by a cough. They're gone. I haven't seen them anywhere. Marco raised his eyebrows. They were on a battlefield, surrounded by hundreds of Marines. It didn't surprise the Phoenix that Thatch couldn't find the boys. Though, Marco had to admit that he was worried about Ace was handling the situation. The fire user's most guarded secret was revealed. One that he had promised Marco that he'd rather die than have to live in another person's shadow. So, Thatch repeated, looking shocked for a second before shaking his head. Akainu's gone as well. He slipped away when the Marines started to gang up on Oyaji. Marco gritted his teeth, clearly annoyed with the whole situation. Damn bastard. You think he's going after them? No doubt that he already has a plan set up, Thatch responded. Great. Marco sighed, shifting his arms into wings. I'm going to go find them. Stay here, alright? What? The man looked outraged for a second. No way, Marco. If you're going, then I'm going too. You need to help everyone fight down here, Marco said, narrowing his eyes at the man. They're fine. Thatch said, crossing his arms stubbornly. Oyaji's still here and I doubt that the Marines are going to let him go anywhere. Damn it. Marco sighed before reluctantly nodding his head. Check the surrounding areas on foot. I'm going to see if I can see anything from the sky. Gotcha. Thatch grinned as he turned around before pausing and looking back. And Marco, be careful, I don't want to have to organize your funeral. Marco gladly returned the grin. Same goes for you, Thatch. I'm not going to be the one dragging your dead ass back up from hell. Out of breath already? Akainu questioned, rolling his eyes. I barely even started messing with you too. You would think that the sons of two famous criminals would put up a better fight. Shut up, Ace roared, fire erupting around them, startling Luffy. Ace paid the boy no attention on Akainu and Akainu only. The Magma Man sent him a confident smirk, something that Ace easily returned with a heated glare. That man has nothing to do with this. Or does he? Akainu started to circle the boys, putting both more on edge than they already were. Ace snarled at him, ready to attack but did not move from his spot in front of Luffy. Your family is dying because of you. Your family is being hunted down because of you. It's a wonder that Whitebeard accepted you after he found out, don't you think, Ace? Ace wanted to scream at him that wasn't what he was thinking and that Whitebeard said that the blood in his mattered just about as much as the color of someone's hair, but found he couldn't. Your family is dying because of you. No, Ace shook his head, eyes wide. No, they couldn't die, could they? They were still fighting. They weren't fighting for him, right? There was no way that they'd do that. No way. Because of you. Ace, watch out. Luffy's warning cry caused him to snap out of his trance, jumping to the side just as Akainu flew past. He landed with a thud on the ground a few meters away, quickly scampering to his feet as Akainu tried to attack him once again. The Marine growled at the fire user. I thought I had you. If it wasn't for the son of Dragon, you'd be dead by now, Gold D Ace. Leave Ace alone. A fist came out of nowhere, slamming into the side of the Marine's face and sending him sprawling. Luffy appeared in front of him not a second later, glaring at the man with his dark brown eyes. He looked horrible, covered from head to toe in bruises, cuts and burns. The bandages that were once a pure white were now stained red along with the rest of his clothing. The boy was shaking slightly and Ace wondered how he kept himself standing. After all, out of the two of them, Luffy had taken the most damage. How much more until he broke? Akainu spat out blood, sitting up and rubbing the side of his face. He pushed himself up, coughing for a second. How annoying. You're getting to be a real pain in the ass, Mugiwara. Time for you to go. Ace didn't even see the man move. All he knew was that 1 minute Luffy was standing in front of him, tall and strong, and the next, he's been sent across the field, crying out in pain and slamming into a large tree. His body slumped to the ground and instead of just jumping back up again like he would normally, he did not move. Lu, Ace's eyes widened in horror, taking a step towards his brother. Even from the distance, the fire user could see the puddle of blood that was slowly condensing under Luffy's body. Fuck. Good riddance. The Marine said, not caring in the slightest. He didn't seem to notice how Ace paid him no mind, continuing to stare at the boy who he'd practically raised and cared for as long as he remembered. Your family is dying because of you. A hand found his mouth as he shook his head. No, Luffy couldn't be dead. Luffy couldn't die from something like that. He'd be fine, right? He just needs to rest for a moment and he'll be back up in no time, fighting with just as much vigor as before. Without even realizing it, Ace felt his legs moving. He didn't even know why, didn't know how, but he knew that if he didn't get to Luffy right now then everything would be gone. Everything. A foot appeared in front of his, hitting his face and sending him flying away from his little brother who he'd been so desperately trying to reach. He skidded on the dirt, rolling a little before his body came to an abrupt stop when his back hit the tree. Ace didn't feel any pain, only the numbness that was sent through his body. He'd never felt so empty, so alone. "It's your fault," and he wanted to scream, to tell the small voice inside of his head to just shut up because he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to admit that it just might be true. "Worthless." "I don't think so, Hyken," Akainu said, standing over him with a smug look on his face. The fire user pushed himself off the ground for what felt like the 100th time, spitting out the coppery taste in his mouth. He growled at the marine, letting the fire on his shoulders appear. "Get out of my way, Sakazuki." "No," the marine said, cracking his knuckles. "Hyken, your brother is dead." "What?" Ace could feel himself being picked up off the ground by his neck and forced to look into the eyes of a man that Ace hated more than anything in the world. The very person who had taken Ace's entire world and crushed it with just a few words. "Your brother is dead," the admiral repeated, smirking victoriously. "The blood of dragon is gone and so is the threat that Mugiwara once posed. There is nothing someone like you can do about it." "I don't have a family." The small, infant-like voice of Luffy echoed through Ace's head. "You'd be my family?" "Stop." Ace screwed his eyes shut, breathing heavily. Tears were in the corners of his eyes but he wouldn't let them fall. There was no way that he'd give this sadist son of a bitch the joy of knowing that he'd hurt him in the worst way possible. "Ace, did you beat the monster that you promised to beat?" Welcome childlike laughter filled Ace's mind, causing the fire user to weakly shake his head. Luffy was gone. Luffy was gone. Shanks saved me and we made a promise. He gave me his straw hat to take care of until we completed that promise. "Ace, did you see? I got my first wanted poster?" Ace opened his eyes, immediately meeting the dark eyes of the Marine Admiral. The man snorted, a dark glare on his face as he squeezed Ace's neck, jostling the man around a bit. "Given up, have you? Ace is my big brother and big brother will always protect me." "Stop." Ace's voice was weak as he slowly moved his hands up to grasp the thick limbs around his neck. Akainu had him pinned up against a tree so he couldn't move, not that he really wanted to move anyway. He coughed, getting some blood in the Admiral's face. "It's a pity, really," Akainu said. "We only knew about Mugiwara because he was on your crew. Otherwise, we wouldn't have dug up his past. Do you understand, Hyken? We wouldn't have known about him. He wouldn't be dead." "Stop. We might even kill Whitebeard while we're at it, and if not now, then in the next few weeks while he's still weakened. I don't want to dirty my hands with such a filthy pirate. Not that you're much better, though." "Stop it. I can see the newspaper headlines tomorrow. Son of Gold D. Roger and Monkey D. Dragon finally get the justice they deserve. It'll be a great relief to the world knowing that Roger's bloodline is dead. Dragon's was just an extra. His life didn't matter to begin with. This place isn't hell. Stop it," Ace finally shouted, snapping open his eyes and glaring at the Marine as he unconsciously released a large burst of Conqueror's Haki. The force sent Akainu flying back a few feet, crashing into a nearby tree. Ace stared at his hands, eyes wide and slightly uneasy at the power that he had displayed, but soon he remembered about Luffy and rushed over to the boy, dropping to his knees as soon as he got close to his small body. "Luffy," Ace whispered, shock lacing his words. His hands hovered over the body of his little brother, unsure if he could touch him. God, his little brother looked so bad. Every inch of his body was covered in some type of wound. He was pale, unmoving. Ace choked down a sob. A groan of pain brought Ace's attention back to the boy in front of him, his eyes widening even more. "Luffy! Luffy!" Ace's breathing was heavy and his voice was coming out in harsh pants, but he couldn't believe it. Luffy was still alive. "Ace!" came the desperate whisper from his little brother, and even Ace had to strain his ears to hear it. He looked down to see the boy's eyes had opened, staring past Ace. "What? Luffy, what is it?" Ace decided to hell with it and gently placed a hand on Luffy's shoulder, ignoring the wince that came from the small commander. Ace, behind you. You damn pirate, Akainu roared, aiming a magma fist at Ace's head. Ace blocked it, haki covering his arms. He was behind him. If he moved, then Luffy was dead. Ace absolutely couldn't let that happen. The Admiral jumped back, snarling. Ace stumbled a bit, then fell to his knees. My body won't move, Ace groaned. God, he was in pain. Ace's head snapped up at the sound of someone approaching, meeting the harsh gaze of the Admiral. And this was it, Ace thought as he struggled to get his body to move. To do something. This was how he was going to die. At the hands of a sadist bastard because of his damn father. The man readied his fist, shifting it into magma, and Ace could only watch with a helpless expression. There was no hope for him. No hope for Luffy. No matter how much he wanted just to run. This was how they were going to die, and there wasn't anything he could do about it. Goodbye, Heiken no Ace. Akainu said, his voice so cold and emotionless that Ace closed his eyes, turning his head away. He could feel the heat coming from the fist and prepared for impact, not that it would do much good. But he never felt the pain, he never felt the heat. The only thing he felt was the sense of horrible wrongness. Ace's eyes opened with a snap, staring in horror as Luffy, his damn little brother who he loves so much, stood in front of him, a magma hand in his chest. No, Luffy. He could hear a shout from somewhere near here and saw Thatch approaching, wearing the same horrified expression that Ace himself was wearing, but he couldn't pay attention to that right now. Not when Luffy. The Admiral pulled his hand out of Luffy's chest with a disgusted sneer. It looked like he was about to strike again, but was sent across the field by Thatch, who had appeared in front of the two, protecting them with his sword. The Admiral immediately took up the challenge, changing his attention to Thatch instead of the two brothers, and took off after the 4th Division commander. Ace didn't care about that though. All he could see was his little brother standing in front of him, a gaping hole through his damn chest. Luffy's legs seemed to give up on him, sending him falling to the ground with a quiet cry of pain. Ace caught the boy in his arms, gently cradling his head in his lap. Why? This time Ace wasn't ashamed when the tears fell as he held his dying brother in his arms, stroking through his matted hair. "'Cause it was better than seeing you die," Luffy croaked out, meeting Ace's gaze. "You idiot," Ace whispered, his own voice cracking. You can't just do something like that." Sorry, even as he was dying, Luffy didn't sound sorry at all. Ace. "What, kid?" Luffy was cut off by a wet-sounding cough, wincing as blood poured from his mouth. "Could you tell everyone thank you?" "Why, Luffy?" Ace knew why, but he wasn't about to admit it. No, Luffy couldn't die. There was no way his son could just flicker out like that. No. Tell them that I'm glad I didn't die alone. Thank you for finding me, Ace. For accepting me. For loving me." Luffy closed his eyes, energy spent. His entire body went limp, and Ace had to physically restrain himself from jerking away. Was he? Ace's entire body felt numb, his grip slowly loosening until Luffy's body slipped out and hit the ground with a wet thud. Blood poured around the two men, and Ace felt as if he was going to scream because there was just no way that Luffy. Ace couldn't help the scream that tore through his throat, his little brother, gone, right before his eyes. She, you guys are the best. I'm glad you found me. Thank you for making me your family. Thank you for finding me, Ace. Ace closed his eyes as the pain of his injuries caught up with him. He knew that he wasn't going to make it out of this one. He could feel his body falling backwards but couldn't bring himself to care. Just before he felt himself black out, he saw Luffy standing in all of his glory, laughing without a care in the world. But Luffy wasn't there. Luffy wasn't with him. After all, this was hell. No matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise. Ace never expected to wake up, and quite frankly, he wasn't sure that he wanted to. Images flashed across his mind. The war, Thatch, Akainu, Luffy. Fuck. What the hell happened to Luffy? The last thing he remembered was Luffy, in his arms, dying. Was he really dead? His little brother was gone? I'm glad I didn't die alone. Damn it. He felt the nice, warm sheets under him, trying to send him back to that blissfully ignorant sleep. Ace wanted to let out a frustrated growl, but no sound was heard. It was like he was floating in a black ocean of nothingness, and damn it, he wanted out. Voices whispered in his ears, though Ace couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded as if he were underwater. All of his scents blurred together as one. It was annoying and at the same time, a little scary. Why couldn't he move? Why couldn't he wake up? He felt his hands grip the sheets even tighter as he tried to open eyes. The voices around him grew quiet, though there were still little whispering sounds every once in a while. He felt a hand slide into his and gave him a comforting squeeze. "Come on, Ace. You need to wake up." The voice was familiar. Really familiar, but Ace couldn't place his mind on who it belonged to. "Open your eyes." And Ace did. Ace, immediately the fire user was tackled in a hug, causing him to wince as a sharp pain shot up his spine. His head started to spin and all he could do was wait until the person, whoever it was, decided that he needed air to breathe. Thatch, another voice, the same one from before, said, his stern voice cutting through the air like a knife. The person that was holding him, Thatch, shifted above him, loosening his grip to give Ace enough space to breathe. "Let him go. You're probably hurting him, anyways." Oops. Thatch pulled away, but not before rustling Ace's hair and sending the fire user a cocky smile. Ace blinked, looking around the white room that he recognized to be the infirmary of the Moby. Marco was sitting calmly in a chair next to Ace's bed, sending the cook a glare. "Sorry, I got caught up in the moment." "I noticed," Ace replied, his voice sounding weak and hoarse. Two simple words threw him into a coughing fit, making both Thatch and Marco jump up and rush to his side. He waved them off with his hand. Marco gave him a suspicious glance but turned around and grabbed something out of Ace's sight range. A cold, glass cup full of water was handed to the fire user and Ace drank it greedily, relishing the feeling of the cool liquid soothing his dry throat. Ace put the glass on the table next to him and rubbed his temples, feeling a bandage wrapped around his head. He frowned, trying to remember why he was in the infirmary. Fuzzy images swam around his mind, but he really couldn't get anything out of them. What happened? Marco frowned at him, trying to mask his worry, though it was obvious. "You don't remember?" Ace shook his head. "We were attacked by a kainu and he cornered you." The memories rushed back and Ace grabbed his head, letting out a groan of pain. He closed his eyes trying to gain control of his mind again, but it wasn't working that well. Marco and Thatch were at his side in seconds, saying things that Ace couldn't understand. Akainu. Akainu was there. So was Luffy and… Fuck. Luffy. What the hell happened? All Ace remembered was Luffy, covered in blood, talking complete gibberish about death and how he was going to die and Luffy was not going to die, right? Ace? The fire user felt a hand on his shoulder and slowly opened his eyes, trying not to show the fear that was bubbling up inside of him. Luffy wasn't dead, he couldn't be. There was no way his little brother would die like that. Luffy. Ace rasped out, trying to shake off the hand. He slowly opened his eyes, staring at the two men he's known for years. Where's Luffy? Both men's expressions immediately turned somber and Marco even shook his head. Neither could look Ace in the eyes. Ace's features went blank. Luffy? He was dead, wasn't he? After all, Ace watched him die. He even held the boy in his arms as he said his last words. It was naive and stupid to think he was still alive after watching it happen. And knowing that it was his entire fault. Ace, Marco said, still not looking the man in the eyes. The blonde shook his head, letting out a sigh and forcing himself to look up. Ace could see the stress and sadness that practically radiated off the man and mentally prepared himself for what Marco was about to say. Luffy's alive. Ace's eyes widened and relief coursed through his veins. He was alive? How? Because the last time Ace saw the boy, he was pretty sure he was dead. It would take more than a miracle to save him. Though, Luffy was a miracle just by himself, but, Marco said, still looking somber. He's in a coma, yoi. What? If Ace hadn't been so injured, he was sure that his fire would have exploded by now, but he could barely sit up as he was. So using his devil fruit was a big no-no. His breath came out as uneven gasps and he struggled to control his feelings. A coma? Ace didn't know what to think. The fire user wasn't a doctor by any means, so he didn't really know what a coma was, but he had heard stories that once a person falls into a coma, they don't wake up. Ace knew it was bad. Ace shut his eyes and shook his head a bit. He felt arms wrap around his body, sending bolt of pain up his spine, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Thatch and I found you two fighting Akainu. Luffy was already down by then, so he couldn't really do anything to help. Marco's voice didn't give away any emotion. You passed out right as I got to you. Thatch pushed Akainu back enough so he could get you back to the ship and well. The Phoenix shrugged with a sigh. Oyaji called everyone back to the ship and left the island as soon as we could. We waited outside the infirmary for hours, Yue. Oyaji was hurt badly as well, so he couldn't wait with us. Otherwise I think he would. Then the nurses came out, told us everything and we've been waiting for both of you to wake up since, Yue. How long have we been out? Ace shook the person, who he assumed to be Thatch, off of his body in favor of leaning back onto the white sheets, taking his pillow and shoving it on his head as if he were trying to block out the world. Week and a half. Thatch answered before Marco had the chance. The nurses though you wouldn't wake up for another week, minimum. Luffy, on the other hand, is a whole different story. The nurses have no clue when he's going to wake up, if at all. Ace screamed into his pillow. Why Luffy? Luffy was innocent. Luffy didn't do anything to deserve the fate that he was given. Why not him? He deserved death. Couldn't he at least take Luffy's place? Why does he get to survive while Luffy was slowly dying? Damn it, he muttered, his voice somewhat muffled by the pillow. Ace. He heard one of the two males in the room sigh. This isn't your fault, Yue. Shut up, Ace roared, throwing the pillow across the room. Just shut up. He stared at the ceiling, feeling disgusted with himself. It is my fault. This whole mess is my fault. Maybe if I had just died a long time ago this wouldn't have happened. It's my fault that Oyaji's hurt. My fault that everyone here was in danger. This whole damn thing is my. You're the one that needs to shut up. Ace suddenly felt a sharp pain explode on his cheek and it took a few seconds to register that Marco had punched him. He was about to recoil but found he couldn't when he saw the two angry, no, furious, expressions on his friends' faces. Why the hell would you say something like that? We're your family, you're Nakama. We don't care about your damn dad. It is not your fault that Akainu attacked us. Damn it, Ace. We're pirates, it's an occupational hazard. Marco. Ace whispered, tears burning his eyes. He wouldn't let them fall, though. No, tears didn't help. Tears only made things worse. You asshole, Marco continued to snap at him like the mother hen he was. Get out of TG state that you managed to pull yourself into and listen. Others care about you and your well-being and although you might think you're alone, you're not, we care about you. Ace, you're our little brother, Yue. Ace stared at the blonde, completely shocked. He knew the man had a temper, but he'd never been on the receiving end of it and, quite frankly, never thought he would. The fire user now knew why even someone like Oyaji would listen to him if this kind of lecture was given. The blonde man in front of him sighed and went to pick up the pillow that Ace had thrown across the room. Thatch watched him, whistling. I haven't seen him that worked up in a long time. He sent the fire user a grin. You really pissed him off, Ace. The pillow was thrown at his face before Marco turned and left the room, blue fire licking on his shoulders. Ace just sighed and shook his head, falling back onto the mattress and shoving the pillow on his face. I figured. Thatch chuckled, ruffling Ace's hair before turning to take his leave too. Get some sleep. You'll heal faster. Right before he left, Thatch tapped the wood. You know everything that Marco said. Well, it's true, Ace. This wasn't your fault. We decided to go to fight them and the consequences are on all of us, not just you. Don't go blaming yourself for stupid shit, alright? And with that, the door was shut, leaving Ace alone with his raging thoughts. The memories were the worst part for Ace. They kept flashing through his mind, reminding him that he'd failed. How could Luffy call him a brother after everything was over? Would he wake up and still be the happy idiot like normal or would things change? Ace hated change. His hands gripped the white sheets as another memory assaulted his mind and his eyeballs darted underneath his eyelids. Sleep? Ace mentally scoffed. There was no way he'd be able to sleep with all the different voices ringing in his head. Yet, he still found himself falling into the peaceful melody and before he knew it, everything went slack and he was sucked into the dark abyss that eagerly greeted him. And the memories seemed to follow. Do you have any family looking after you? No, the kid, Luffy, looked miserable like he was remembering a painful memory, alone. Ace remembered the way Whitebeard practically lit up, shaking his head fondly. Is that so? So no one is looking after you? No, came the same reply. Alone. Ace remembered how the giant man that he'd come to know his father smiled, ruffling the boy's hair while Luffy looked up, his eyes rather wide. How would you like to join us? We could be your family. Surprisingly, Ace was the one to protest, but Oyaji. Hush, Brad. Whitebeard had commanded. It's the boy's decision. Family? The 4-year-old almost sounded wistful. I don't have a family. You could, Whitebeard had said boldly, and Ace remembered the feeling of defiance when the gang had wanted to take a boy, no older than 4, under their wing. We could be your family. I want a family, Luffy said in a childish voice, looking up with big brown eyes. You be my family? And Ace remembered the loud laughter that followed. Of course, Luffy. We'll be your family, always. Luffy's strong, Ace. You've got to remember that. Put a little trust into your brother, yeah? I'm not going to die from something small like that. She. Ace worried too much. I'll be fine. I made a promise to Shanks. When I get older, I'm going to challenge him to a fight to show him how strong I've become. I'll definitely beat him, won't I, Ace? Hey Ace, do you think you could tell me more about Sabo? He was so cool, I would have loved to meet him. Kid. Luffy was cut off by a wet-sounding cough, wincing when he jarred his giant injury. Could you tell everyone thank you? Why, Luffy? Ace knew why, but he wasn't about to admit it. No, Luffy couldn't die. There was no way his son could just flicker out like that. No. Tell them. Tell them that I'm glad I didn't die alone. Thank you for finding me, Ace. For accepting me. For loving me. Luffy closed his eyes, energy spent. His entire body went limp, and Ace had to physically restrain himself from jerking away. He remembered the horror that had slowly spread through his veins as he held his little brother in his arms. Luffy looked so small, even with that smile on his face, so fragile, almost like glass. And something in Ace broke. It had been almost 3 months now, and no matter how much Ace refused to admit it, he was losing hope. He'd been released almost 2 months ago, quickly taking up his position in favor of getting everything back up and running. Ace had noticed the wary stares that he sometimes got from lesser crewmates, and he tried not to let it get to him, but there was always that small voice in the back of his head that kept yelling that they'd never trust him. That change was inevitable. Luffy had yet to wake up or even move, for that matter. As soon as Ace was released from the infirmary, he'd gone straight to the place that they'd kept the 17th Division commander locked up and just sat next to him, having a one-sided conversation for hours on end. Ace knew that the longer someone was in a coma, the less likely it was for them to ever wake up, but every time he looked at Luffy's slumbering face, he couldn't help but let a small spark of hope flare to life. Luffy honestly hadn't been doing well. For the first month, he'd been constantly switching from stable to unstable in a matter of minutes. He'd gone under cardiac arrest almost 3 times, along with several other medical conditions that Ace never bothered to learn. The boy had been hooked up to several IVs, along with a breathing mask just in case his body decided that it no longer wanted to work. It hurt everyone to see the once happy, lively idiot confined to the bed, unable to do anything, but it hit Ace, Marco and Thatch the hardest. They'd been there since the beginning, watching him grow up into the man he was now. Ace sighed, giving the sad boy's hand a reassuring squeeze. It wasn't like Luffy could feel it in the state he was now, but it still brought comfort to Ace knowing that he was still there, right by his side. The fire user shook his head, trying to block out the beeping of the random machines scattered across the room and the deep breathing from the breathing mask over Luffy's face. Ace leaned his head back, closing his eyes but not letting go of his little brother's hand. It was hard on all of them. Normally, Luffy would be everywhere at once, bouncing around the deck like a rubber ball or picking fights with the newer members of the crew. Seeing him confined in an infirmary, unable to move, to do anything, hurt. And Ace didn't mean physical pain. No, he'd much prefer outer wounds compared to the heavy feeling in his heart. This wasn't your fault, Ace. We decided to go to fight them, and the consequences are on all of us, not just you. Don't go blaming yourself for stupid shit, alright? But no matter what words were said, Ace knew it was still his fault. Maybe, just maybe, if he hadn't been born in the first place, none of this would have happened. Luffy would be up and running, Marco would be more stress-free, and everyone else wouldn't have to worry about the constant marine attacks. It'd be better for everyone, right? Ace sighed once again. It wasn't like he could change the past. All he could do is help the future. Maybe one day soon. Luffy would wake up and everything would go back to normal. The Marines could continue to go after them for simply being pirates. He gained the trust back from his nakama, and Luffy would be up and running around, demanding food like the big idiot he was. How naive. It would never go back to the way it was, and Ace wasn't quite sure he liked the new routine. Everything seemed darker somehow, like the light was fading away, and as much as Ace hated to admit it, he hated the dark. After finding some friends, finding his nakama, he didn't want to go back to being that lonely little 10-year-old with no one to trail. A voice said right outside the door, sounding rather somber. Ace cracked open an eye, glancing at the door before sighing and pushing himself up. He stumbled over to the door, putting his ear onto the wooden frame. "We don't like it either, Commander Marco," a female voice. Ace recognized it to be one of the nurses. "The whole ordeal, it hurts all of us. We've known him since he was just a little boy." Well, Marco's voice tried to cut through, but was interrupted by some shushing sounds. There was a saddened sigh as another nurse spoke up. "We know that it's really hard on you, but it's quite obvious that he's not going to get better anytime soon. He crashed really hard last night. We're running out of time and resources. There's only so much the machines can do, and well, without the machines he'd die. We think it's time to let him go. He's in so much pain, Commander. He's not healing like he should." Ace couldn't stand this anymore. He yanked on the handle of the door, throwing it open and startling some of the people outside. His eyes were narrowed dangerously and he spoke up, "Let who go?" "Commander Ace." The nurses, all 5 of them, yelped, quite surprised by his intrusion. The head doctor just sighed at the sight of him. Ace ignored them and chose to turn his gaze to Marco, surprised when he saw the beginnings of tears in his eyes. "Let who go?" Ace repeated, his eyes filled with a dangerous fire. His question was directed at the group, but he only wanted answers from Marco. The others didn't matter. A dead weight was settling in his stomach, and although Ace had an idea on just who they were talking about, he refused to admit it. There was no way they'd do something like that. Just no way. After all, Whitebeard pirates didn't abandon their nakama. One of the nurses behind him let out a small squeaking noise. "Well, you see." "Ace." The doctor swiftly interrupted, her eyes narrowed in the light. If Ace had been paying attention, he would have noticed the stress lines all around her face and the way she was as stiff as a board. "We think it's time that we let Luffy go." "What? Please understand, Commander Ace." One of the nurses tried to plead with him, tears in her own eyes. "Luffy's been in a coma for around 4 months now and hasn't gotten much better. He's in a lot of pain right now and there's nothing we can do to help him. We can't just keep forcing him to live because we want him to." She took a deep breath and shook her head numbly. "We think that it's time to pull the plug. That way you won't have to suffer anymore." Ace saw red. "You can't just give up on him like that," he snarled, snapping his head around to face the nurses, instead of Marco, who now refused to look him in the eye. Fire licked his shoulders, burning some of the bandages that held his recent wounds together. How dare they? How could they even think of doing something like that? Not when. "It's my fault. All my fault." Marco's voice was tight, full with all the emotion that he'd bottled up inside. Ace couldn't think about the blonde right now. After all, he wasn't the one that was going to die. He never gave up. Ace continued, closing his eyes and trying to focus on keeping his breathing normal. He would not hyperventilate. Ever. Even when the situation was completely hopeless and there was no way to win, he stayed. He stayed so he could save his nakama, his family. "Ace," Marco tried again, this time putting a hand on his shoulder and giving a hard squeeze. Ace heard nothing. Do you know what he once said? The fire was back again, this time more dangerous than ever. He said that being alone was worse than being hurt. If you kill him, not only will he be alone, but also we'll never see him again. Ever. He'll be gone. Forever. "Ace, please." Marcos choked on his words, "Please stop." "No," Ace responded, eyes still closed. Tears were forming beneath the lids, but Ace refused to let them fall. Tears wouldn't help. They never do. He can't cry right now. Not when so many were watching him. "Commander Ace," one of the nurses tried to approach him, hands behind her back. "We know how you feel, but we think it's for the best." "A week." Ace took a deep breath, shaking his head. Inside he was screaming at himself to get a lid on his emotions but found it hard. After all, the nurses wanted to, basically, kill Luffy. Take away his suffering. What a bunch of bull. Give him a week. The nurses glanced at each other, giving silent signs that only they could understand before the doctor stepped up and nodded. A week. It'll give everyone a chance to say goodbye. And with that, they left, leaving both Ace and Marco in an uncomfortable silence. Ace didn't know what to do. He was confused and hurting in the worst way possible. The fire user doubted that Marco was in a much better condition, seeing as he'd raised the boy just as much, if not, even more than Ace had. Luffy was more like a son to them than a brother, and it hurt watching him slowly fade away, leaving nothing but memories. Ace closed his eyes, his back facing away from his best friend. What could he do? He got Luffy a week, but seeing as he hasn't woken up for months, what good would a week do? The fire user's eyes snapped open when he felt himself being turned around, two strong arms wrapping around his shoulder and pulling him into a tight hug. Ace was stunned for a second before he hugged the blonde back. The emotions that he'd been feeling for the past 4 months suddenly swelled up, and for the first time in a very long time, Ace felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't question the growing wetness on his shoulder. Because even if it was just a week, they were going to do everything in their power to save their little brother. Going to deliver Bink's sake following the sea breeze. Riding on the waves far across the salty depths, the merry evening sun. Painting circles in the sky as the birds sing. "You've got a week, buddy," Ace whispered to the boy that lay beside him, completely unaware of the conflict that was raging around the ship. As expected, almost none of the crew liked the idea of pulling the plug, and even Oyaji protested, but the nurses seemed to know how to deal with this and quickly changed the favor, albeit reluctantly. Several of the crew members had stopped by to say their final goodbyes before walking out in tears, especially those who were closer to Luffy. Ace refused to let another tear slip since the incident with Marco, and thankfully, the blonde never brought up the subject. It was hard enough as it is without thinking that Luffy basically had a Grim Reaper hanging over his body, waiting for them to finally finish him off. Everyone's so worried, the fire user continued, giving the hand a squeeze. But they still have hope. They still think that you can wake up in a week. After all, you're a miracle by yourself. Surely you can get yourself out of this mess, right, Luffy? No answer greeted him, not that he expected one in the first place. "Farewell to the harbor, to my old hometown, let's all sing out with the dawn." As the ship set sail, waves of gold and silver dissolved to salty spray. As we all set sail to the ends of the sea, 6 days left, Ace muttered, closing his eyes and laying his head on Luffy's bed. He tried to shoo away the dark thought in his mind, but they always seemed to be right around the corner, attacking him while he's down. Why'd you do it? Images of Akainu flashed through his mind and he shook his head. Damn it, Luffy. You're not a hero. You're a pirate. Next time. His voice broke. Next time don't go saving my ass. It's not worth it anyways. Going to deliver Bink's sake, we are pirates sailing through the sea. The waves are our pillows, the ship, our roost flying the proud skull. On our flags and our sails. 5, Ace sighed, burying his head into his hands. Thatch, who had decided that he didn't want Ace to visit alone today, put a hand on his shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. 5 days left, Luffy. Do you think yes and show them that you wouldn't give up that easily? A chair was pulled up next to his. Or at least some sign that you're still there, Thatch said, slipping his hand on the boy's face, giving him a sad smile. Ace sighed, shaking his head. We miss you, Lou. Now comes a storm. Through the far-off sky now the waves are dancing. Beat upon the drums, if you lose your nerve this breath could be your last. But if you just hold on the morning sun will rise. It's been about 3 days since the nurses decided to give you a week. Ace hummed, shaking his head and giving a small smile to the boy in bed. So then it would be day 4, I guess. He groaned, burying his head into the sheets. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Luffy didn't even stir, he just continued to lie there, completely oblivious to the outside world. Why are you always in trouble? Ace whispered. Why are you always protecting people, so willing to throw your own life away? Luffy, damn it, if you die, I'm going to kill you. Going to deliver Bink's sake today and tomorrow. Our dreams through the night waving our goodbyes. We'll never meet again, but don't look so down, for at night the moon will rise. 3 days, now. Marco muttered, glancing at the sulking fire user. His sharp gaze turned soft when he gazed at the small boy in the bed, looking so innocent and helpless that it made Marco's chest swell. He tried not to let it get to him, he really did. He knew that if he were sad, Luffy'd be upset as well, so he tried to just continue on even though the burden was killing him. He'd said yes to those damn nurses. He told them that they could do whatever they needed. He was regretting his choice now. Damn it, Luffy. He whispered low enough so the fire user couldn't hear him. Just wake up already. Going to deliver Bink's sake today and tomorrow. Our dreams through the night waving our goodbyes. We'll never meet again, but don't look so down, for at night the moon will rise. It's sad, isn't it? Thatch said as Ace, Marco and him gathered in the white infirmary, checking up on Luffy like usual. Ace sat by the bed, holding the boy's hand in his, listening to the agonizingly slow beeping of the heart monitor. Yeah, Marco muttered, reaching a hand out and ruffling the boy's hair like he would normally do, only this time there was no energetic remark or whine. It was utterly silent. Only 2 days left. This week is going by too fast. Ace placed his chin on Luffy's hand, closing his eyes. Just 2 more days? It didn't seem like a day had passed, let alone almost a week. Yeah, he whispered, yeah, it is. I doubt Luffy would want us to be sulking like this, Thatch said, shaking his head at the memories. But I can't seem to help myself. You'd think that we'd get used to not having him bouncing around the deck, acting like a total idiot. After living with him for almost 17 years, it's hard to get used to the silence. Ace shook his, allowing a small, sad smile to wash across his face. It seems almost surreal without the constant yelling and smashing of random objects. Don't forget the cries of food, Thatch added, chuckling wetly, and Ace knew the man was trying to hold back tears. And the fact that he eats all the food in the whole damn kitchen. Ace and Marco both chuckled, though Ace quickly stopped and sighed. He could even out-eat me if he really wanted to. Yeah, Thatch's watery smile faded a bit. It's hard not to cook the extra 100 plates or so. I keep forgetting every time I'm in the kitchen. I guess I'm better at it now, but it just feels like something missing. Ace hummed in acknowledgement, cracking open an eye so he could stare at his little brother's slumbering face. Luffy, we're all waiting for that miracle. Going to deliver Bink's sake, let's all sing it with the dawn. A song of the waves, doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones. Never ending, ever wandering, our funny traveling tale. Mugiwara dead, dragon's bloodline finally extinguished. Ace scrunched up his nose after reading the morning newspaper's headline. He could already tell that it wasn't something that he wanted to read, but forced himself to scan the page. There was a picture of Luffy in the corner, and damn, he really did look dead. Too bad he was alive, for another day at least. Well, he thought rather bitterly, they sure took their damn time getting this thing out. Ace. Thatch's voice came out of nowhere, and Ace barely had time to register the face before his best friend was leaning over him, looking at the newspaper with open curiosity. W.H. Jaridan, oh. The newspaper was promptly ripped out of Ace's hands before he could protest, and Ace glared. Thatch was frowning now, reading over the small article that depicted the battle with Akainu. Whitebeard severely injured. Mugiwara dead. Hyken presumed dead. What the hell is this bullshit? I don't know, Ace said, lying back on the table. It's just part of the morning newspaper. I didn't get a chance to read it. Well, Thatch scrunched up his nose much like Ace had earlier and crumpled up the paper, making a shot into the trash can. You don't want to. It's full of bullshit. Ace sent the man a dull glare before shaking his head. All right, if you say so. He stood up from his bench, his features slowly shutting down. His breath hitched. You want to get Marco? I was going to say my last goodbyes to Luffy before. Well, you know. Thatch shot him a somber look and nodded, disappearing out of the gallery in a few seconds. Ace decided that he'd wait for them in the infirmary instead of staying in this room, getting pity glances from everyone else. After a while it really became annoying, and Ace wasn't enjoying the attention at all. If anything, he was starting to loathe being in the spotlight. He quickly walked out of the room and into the empty hallways, heading down the route that he often used. He only passed 2 or 3 people, who told him hello, but Ace ignored all of them. It wasn't worth stopping for a chat when his little brother was going to die tonight. By his own family as well. Ace hadn't even realized that he's arrived until he took a deep breath and shook his head, clearing his thoughts. He was just here to say goodbye, not get all emotional. He'd have to be strong and show everyone that he could still move on. After all, that's what Luffy would want. He pushed open the door, peeking inside to see Marco and Thatch waiting for him, somber smiles on their faces. Ace stood up a bit straighter and walked in the room, shutting the door quietly behind him. Luffy was still where he's been for the past 4 months, in the bed and still quite dead to the world. Ace nodded to Marco and Thatch, quietly taking a seat right next to the comatose boy and slipping his hand into his. He sighed, well aware that Thatch and Marco had pulled chairs over and were currently sitting next to him. Ace glanced at the boy, shaking his head, a sad gleam appearing in his eyes. "Luffy, why are you so much trouble?" Thatch reached over and stroked Luffy's hair. "We were going to miss you, buddy." They all ignored how his voice cracked, full of emotion. Ace might have promised himself that he wasn't going to cry anymore, but Thatch had no such qualms. "Take care of yourself, Brad," Marco muttered, closing his eyes with a sigh. "Luffy," Ace whispered, squeezing the boy's hand. "Damn it, you asshole. You're being selfish. Can't you think of everyone's reactions if you die? We'd all be devastated. You're stupid, clumsy, and an idiot, but we love you. So just wake up, already. You promised, didn't you? You promised Shanks and that other girl." Ace broke off, racking through his brain to try and remember the name. "Robin. Yeah, Robin. Are you just going to abandon them like that? They trusted you, Luffy. Come on, wake up." His voice cracked and tears burned his eyes, but like so many times before, Ace refused to let them fall. "Just wake up, Luffy. Please wake up." Ace barely felt it at first. After all, it was just Ace's palm, but then it happened again, and again, and again, and Ace finally snapped out of it and looked down to see the hand that was holding Luffy's slowly move on its own. Thatch and Marco apparently saw it too and broke out into wide grins. "That little shit," Ace said, wiping tears from his eyes as he stood up. Thatch stood up as well, taking Luffy's hand. Gently, Marco squeezed it and almost jumped when he felt a small squeeze back. The cook didn't seem to notice the happy tears that were rolling down his cheeks, and neither did Marco. "Well, I'll be damned," Thatch whispered, a happy grin coming across his features. He quickly wiped the tears away, only for them to be replaced by new ones. "I knew the kid was too stubborn to die. That's just how D's are." Marco bent in closer to the boy, unable to stop his own tears. "Luffy, can you hear me?" There was a groan from the previously lifeless body, making Marco grin even wider. "Good. We need you to open your eyes though, can you do that?" All he got in response was another groan. "Come on, Lou," Ace whispered, ignoring the encouragement from Marco and Thatch. The young commander's body shifted for a second before his eyes started to twitch, and he slowly opened them, only to flinch from the light and shut them once again. He tried to open his eyes once again, this time succeeding and glancing around the small infirmary room. The boy looked at Ace, confusion washing over his features. The machines hooked up to his body started beeping wildly. "Ass," he muttered, his voice coming out as a croak. They could barely hear him through the breathing mask he wore. Luffy shifted in bed so he could look at the other side, trying to focus on the other two people in the room. "Soth, Mako? We're right here, Luffy." Thatch grinned, ruffling the boy's hair once again, and before Ace knew what he was doing, he had already tackled the boy in a hug, ignoring the wince of pain from the younger. He could feel Thatch and Marco slowly join him, being much more mindful of Luffy's injuries. "You idiot," Ace cried out. His little brother was alive and awake, safely in the arms of the Whitebeard pirates. Then he remembered the newspaper that he'd stumbled upon earlier, and he grinned. Mugiwara dead, Dragon's bloodline finally extinguished. And all Ace wanted to do was laugh and tell the whole world, no, not quite yet. Ace hated this island. He didn't know why, and had no good or definite reason either, but this island had been sending him bad vibes for the past hour and a half since they landed. The tall, dark trees that lined the edge of the forest made Ace's skin crawl, and whenever a rustle from the bushes was heard, Ace practically jumped out of his socks. No matter what his pride was screaming at him, Ace did not want to go on this island. And if that meant sitting here like a little wuss while everyone else explored, he was perfectly fine with that. He knew, however, that he had a hyper younger brother who would just drag him off anyway, in search of the new island adventure, or something like that. Marco would just follow behind, chuckling at his misfortune, and Thatch would squeeze his way in, even if no one invited him. It was just a normal, everyday routine when they'd reach a new island, and normally, Ace loved it. This time, all he wanted to do was curl into a ball in his bed and wait until the ringing in his ears and the horrible feeling in his stomach just went away, never to come back again. But as always, fate hated his sorry ass. So when Luffy bounded up to him, grabbing his hand and dragging him forcefully off the side of the boat, sending him tumbling into the ground with a muffled, "Oof." While Marco and Luffy just jumped gracefully off the side, landing on their feet, grins on their faces, Ace didn't protest. He wanted to, wished that he could, but he couldn't. There was no way Luffy would just let him off because he didn't like an island. In fact, the small commander would probably just laugh at him and make sure to keep an even closer eye on him so he didn't dart off. After all, you can't break a routine and get away with it. "Luffy," Ace called as the younger boy ran ahead, slowly disappearing from view. The fire user started to jog, aware that Marco and Thatch were following close behind. "Luffy, wait up." Luffy didn't seem to acknowledge them or even hear them. Instead, he just kept sprinting ahead, not once looking back. Ace gritted his teeth, annoyed at the fact that the younger wasn't paying them any mind. "Damn it, Luffy, slow down." When they finally caught up to the boy, the first thing Ace noticed was the prominent frown that lined the boy's face as he looked at the forest in front of them. His entire posture was tense, as if waiting for an attack. It was almost like he could sense something that Ace couldn't. "Luffy," Thatch put a hand on the young commander's shoulder, looking at him with concerned eyes. "Hey, buddy. What's wrong?" Luffy's only response was to flinch away from Thatch's hand, turning and looking at the commanders as if he didn't recognize them. It was frightening, to say the least, when Luffy looked up. Fear lined up in his eyes. Ace wanted to shout, to grab onto the 16-year-old's shoulder as he turned and fled into the forest, disappearing from view. "What the hell?" Ace whispered, his eyes wide because in all those years he'd spent caring for the boy that had never happened. Luffy never once looked at them like that. The only time that came close was back when they first met, but the fear was not the same. It scared Ace. It honestly scared him. Was he losing his little brother? As confused as he was, Ace was not about to let Luffy go so easily. So, without much thought, he sprinted after the boy, ignoring the yells of his friends. The fire user didn't know why, but anger started to bubble up in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't mad at Luffy. No, he couldn't be mad at Luffy, but he was mad at whatever the hell did this to his little brother. He didn't mind when the branches would whip back as he pushed them out of the way, creating small scratches on his skin. He could have just turned to fire and have nothing affect him, but to be honestly, he never thought of the option. It was like his mind went blank, searching for one thing and one thing only. That thing happened to be his little brother. Ace. His mind finally registered the fact that someone was calling him, begging for his attention. With a snarl, he spun around, eyes blazing. Marco and Thatch stood behind him, panting and making unhappy noises. "What the hell, yoy?" "The better question would be, where are we?" Thatch said, shaking his head and dusting himself off. Ace paused, his glare lessening, and he looked around, adopting a confused expression on his face. Marco, noticing Ace's expression, sent the fire user an agitated glare. "You got us lost." Ace huffed defiantly. "I did not. Then where are we, yoy?" Ace hummed, looking around at all the leaves and vines in the giant forest. "We're just mildly displaced." Marco growled at him, and Ace assumed that his answer was not as creative as he thought it was. "That makes no sense, you ass." Ace held up his hands in defense. It wasn't like he really cared for where he was going in the first place. If they were lost right now, then there was no doubt that Luffy was lost, somewhere out in that unforgiving jungle. Ace bit the inside of his lip, glancing around the clearing once again. Normally, he wouldn't be worried. After all, Luffy was strange. He'd have his moments when he'd do something completely unexpected and random, surprising everyone. However, that was not the case in this situation. Or at least, Ace thought it wasn't. In all the years that he'd lived with Luffy, the boy had never once looked at them with so much hurt and pain written all over his face. If they could just. Just find Luffy again, then everything would be fine. They'd go back to the ship, leave the island and never come back again. I know, it's just, whatever he had to say was cut off when he saw a flash of red through the trees, gaining his attention. He could just make out the figure right before it emerged from the trees. Luffy? The male stared at them like a deer caught in a headlight. He looked different, but Ace wasn't paying much attention to the details right now. Marco and that's head snapped up, greeting the boy's arrival with a wide-eyed stare. Before Ace knew what he was doing, he rushed to his little brother, embracing him into a hug. Damn it, you idiot. Don't run off like that. He ignored the way Luffy stiffened under his touch as if he half expected Ace to just go right through him. Ace? The smaller male croaked out, as if something terrible had happened to him. Ace pulled away, making sure to keep a firm hold on his shoulders just in case the male decided to bolt again. He looked the boy over for injuries, starting at his face. He was covered in small injuries like cuts and bruises, but there didn't seem to be any major damage for the most part on his face. Once he glanced at his chest, however, Ace's eyes widened and he immediately changed his mind. The scar. He whispered and Luffy stiffened, trying to pull away from him. He raised his voice a bit, narrowing his eyes and meeting Luffy's eyes. What the hell happened to you? Where were you? We just saw you a few minutes ago. Luffy just stared at him like he wasn't real. Apparently, the questions Ace gave him were having a hard time processing in his mind. Ace. Just as Ace was about to fire more questions at the confused boy, Marco cut him off, his tone hard and untrusting. That isn't Luffy. What are you talking about? Ace snapped, whirling around to face his nakama. Of course it's Luffy. Who else could it be? The maybe not Luffy interrupted everyone before they had a chance to form their words. He glanced at Ace, then at Thatch and Marco. His gaze sharp and his stance tense. Who the hell are you guys? Luffy, Ace tried to say, but then Marco's words rushed into his head and he stopped his sentence short. That isn't Luffy. Thatch drew his sword and pointed it at the not Luffy lookalike. His eyes had a dangerous glint to them that Ace had never seen before in the man's eyes. Just what have you done to our baby brother? None of them missed the flinch that the look-alike gave when Thatch had said, baby brother. He backed up a bit. But his gaze never-thing that reminded Ace of Luffy's determination shown in the black orbs, and Ace really had to wonder if maybe this was Luffy and Thatch and Marco were overreacting. What are you talking about? The not Luffy looked confused, but there was still that hidden emotion in his eyes that Ace couldn't quite identify. It was like this person was hurting in more ways than one. You know what we're talking about, you bastard, Thatch snarled, taking a step forward like he was about to attack. And without another word, the not Luffy turned around and disappeared. It was painful. Not physically, exactly, as Luffy's body had no wounds, but everything still ached. He felt his energy slowly draining away from him the further he got from the ship, almost as if he were slowly drowning in the unforgiving ocean that haunted his nightmares all those years ago. He didn't know exactly what got into him. One moment he was like he normally was, dragging Ace and everyone else off the ship and complaining that they were slow. To him, a new island was an adventure, but here, on this island, it was different. Something was different. Luffy probably stared to feel it as soon as the tree line to the forest became visible, though it was no more than a speck in the horizon. He'd ignored it then, writing it off as him being hungry, but then, it started getting worse and worse to the point that everything just hurt. So when Thatch had reached out, trying to touch him, he freaked. He knew that there was hurt in all their eyes when he left. But he couldn't stay with them. He figured that if he found the mystery thing that was hurting him, he'd just have to beat it up and then he'd be fine again. It was his battle this time, so he didn't want to get his brothers involved just in case that the mystery thing hurt them too. Luffy huffed, closing his eyes. Thinking about it wasn't going to help him. Only action and more action. He hummed in approval, opening his eyes and taking off into a sprint. As he ran through the trees, he started to notice that the pain was going away. It was little things at first, like him punching an animal that tried to get in his way and feel no impact, or the fact that whenever he moved, he'd feel cottony, not in the agonizing pain like before. And even then, the feeling was fading fast. The young commander furrowed his eyebrows and was about to turn around and go find the ship again, figuring that he did, in fact, beat up the mystery thing, when suddenly, he wasn't running anymore. Luffy barely registered that he's bumped into something, or someone. until he was sent flying back a few feet, landing with his back hitting a tree, and was satisfied to see that it was a person and that person had suffered the same fate he had. He got up from the ground, about to apologize to the other person, but the words died out in his throat when the mystery person pushed himself off of the ground and faced him. Me? He tilted his head to side, clearly curious. After all, you didn't get to meet yourself every day, even if the Grand Line did a lot of crazy shit to them. His other self just gaped at him, apparently thinking something along the same lines. You got to be kidding. Luffy just flashed his look-alike a grin, wandering over to him and offering a hand. She, the new world's a really fun place. His other self looked at the hand for a moment as if he were deciding whether or not to take it. Eventually, he sighed, looking rather subdued and grabbed the offering hand, pushing himself on his feet. Yeah, it is. Luffy laughed again, poking his counterpart in the cheek, looking at him with fascination and curiosity. His counterpart returned the look, a grin of his own coming to his face. Nah, how old are you? You look a lot older than me. I'm 19. His other self answered, offering a grin. You? Luffy huffed, crossing his arms. I'm only 16. His other self looked surprised. And you're a pirate? Luffy nodded his head, grinning. Of course he was a pirate. What else would he be? That's weird. I didn't set out to become a pirate until I was 17, at least. Weird. Luffy laughed, eyes twinkling. How'd you get here? Is it the Mystery Island? The other Luffy bit the inside of his cheek, trying to think. It was obvious that he didn't know exactly how he got there, but he did know that it had something to do with the island. I dunno. He answered, shaking his head. I just know that one moment I was with my crew and the next, I'm here. Robin might know though. She's really smart. Like, really, really smart. Crew? Luffy blinked in confusion. You have a crew? His other self looked at him like he was stupid. Well, yeah, I'm the captain. What about Oyaji? He found himself saying, isn't he the captain? Oyaji? They started walking in the opposite direction that Luffy came in, towards what Luffy hoped was the ship. Who's Oyaji? Oyaji. Luffy said, thinking that would explain everything. Whitebeard? He's our captain. What about becoming Pirate King? Luffy didn't like the look that the other Luffy was giving him. His other self reached up, taking off his treasured straw hat and fiddling with the rims. You have Shanks' hat too, right? Luffy's hand quickly found his own head and they stopped walking. Didn't you promise him? I promised Shanks that one day I'd beat him. Luffy informed the older male. I didn't promise to become Pirate King. That's going to be Oyaji. Luffy hummed as a silence evoked the two. It wasn't like it was awkward or tense or anything like that, it was just quiet, both boys lost in their thoughts and fears. Suddenly, Luffy's hand shot out, catching his other self by surprise as he started to drag him forward, offering a large grin and laugh. Come on, Ace and the others will really want to meet you. The second time Ace met the other Luffy look-alike, it was just as strange as the first time. They'd first heard the noise, something that sounded like happy shouting and laughing. Ace had shared one look with Thatch and Marco before taking off in the direction of the noise because noise only meant one thing in a peaceful forest, Luffy. And they did find Luffy. Two of them, in fact. Laughing about one stupid thing that one had said that, apparently, was really funny and sent both of them into pearls of laughter. Ace blinked once. Twice. Then, looked over at Marco, eyes wide. Please tell me I'm not the only one seeing this. I don't know what to say to this situation, the blonde answered. The other Luffy look-alike was the first to notice them, his gaze falling on Ace before that pain from before flashed through his eyes and his laughter died. His Luffy followed his gaze and upon seeing them, grinned brightly. He bounded over to them, dragging the still shocked. What the hell was he so shocked about? Other Luffy with him. His Luffy grabbed the other Luffy's shoulders, pushing him out in front like he was showing him off. Hey Ace. This is other me. He's from another dimension or something, we haven't really figured out the details yet, but he's a pirate and got his own crew, isn't that cool? Another dimension? It seemed a little far-fetched to just believe something like that. But then again, there was another version of his little brother standing right in front of him. That didn't mean that he couldn't be skeptical though. As if sensing Ace's feeling, the other Luffy turned to him, meeting his eyes for the first time and pulling on his cheek. Ace watched in fascination as it stretched to abnormal proportions. He knew that there could never be 2 devil fruit at a time in the world. Even if it was a devil fruit that allowed the complete copy of someone, that didn't mean shit for the devil fruit. They went by their own terms, unable to be copied or forcefully made again. So as much as Ace wanted to deny it, he couldn't deny the fact that there are 2 Gomu no Mis in the world right now. So, he came to the conclusion, apparently the other Luffy was innocent from the start. Ace was Stag Thatch's side when they'd met him before, ready to attack. If he hadn't fled, then it wouldn't have been pretty. Ace made a noise in the back of his throat. Where do you even find these people, Luffy? Luffy just giggled, letting his counterpart go in favor of jumping on Ace's back, sending the fire user stumbling back a few feet. He just barely caught the look of something that flashed on the other Luffy's features, disappearing as soon as it appeared. But he still caught it and it had him wondering just what had this person gone through. I guess we should report to Oyaji, Thatch stated, offering a grin to the newcomer. Sorry about before. Thought you'd abducted our Luffy or something. He paused. You want to come back to the ship with us? We can help you get home if you want. Other Luffy blinked at him, offering a slight smile. That'd be nice. I need to get back to my crew as fast as I can. Thatch hummed in agreement, spinning on his heels and stared to walk to the ship. I don't think it'd be pretty if the Marines found out there were 2 of you now. After hearing a laugh of agreement from the other Luffy, Thatch turned around, offering a hand. I'm Thatch, by the way. The pineapple head is Marco. Luffy, from Ace's back, giggled, earning a playful whack from the said pineapple head. And I think you already know Ace. Almost immediately, Ace felt the piercing gaze on his back. Yeah. I know Ace. He was my older brother. Ace didn't miss the past tense. I haven't seen him in years. The fire user felt the way Luffy's hands tightened around his neck, a clear sign that he didn't exactly like the statement that was said. You mean he doesn't visit you? There was a sad gleam in other Luffy's eyes when he spoke again. He would if he could, I bet. But even before that, it was hard to contact him. Ace has his own crew. You guys. At least that's still the same in our worlds. I left 3 years after he did and gathered up my own crew. Marco glanced at the male out of the corner of his eye. How old is the age difference between you 2? Ace was about to tell the man off for asking such a ridiculous question. But the words died in his throat when other Luffy grinned. He's only 3 years older than me. I met him back when I was 7. Ace was really strong. There was a sense of nostalgia in his voice. He didn't really like me at first, but then him and Sabo accepted me into their family. It was nice. I didn't really have a lot of friends in Fushia and there was no way I was going to stay around with Dayton all day. He trailed off at the end. Ace sputtered for a second, clearly surprised. He was about to say something when the Luffy that was bouncing on his back laughed. Wow. Me and Ace's age difference is really big. He poked Ace in the cheek. Ace is old. I'm not that old, Ace said, defensively. Then he shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. But that's not the point. You grew up in East Blue? With me and Sabo? Other Luffy hummed. Yeah, it was really nice until. He paused, looking down at his hands. Well, until Sabo died. I guess. Ace was really upset. Like, really, really upset. Dayton had to tie him to a tree just so he won't go and kill the celestial dragons. Yes. Ace remembered everything clearly. It took Dayton a month for her to trust him enough that he wouldn't go out and set the whole damn blaze ablaze once again. This time, instead of the slums, it would be Hightown. Celestial dragons? Thatch muttered, bastards. Other Luffy hummed in agreement but then shook his head. That was a long time ago, though. I've got my Nakama now and I got stronger so I don't have to lose anyone again. I'll protect them. Ace offered a grin. Of course you will. His eyes flashed ahead and he caught sight of the outline of the ship, standing there in all of its glory. Ace felt the smile on his lips grow even more and he laughed. So, how about we go meet Oyaji? The crew, as they figured, freaked out when 2 Luffys walked onto the deck. Of course. Some just freaked out because one walks to the deck and bring all the chaos that he possibly can, but 2? It was a walking disaster that was waiting to happen. So after they'd calmed everyone down, well, Marco did, the other 4 just laughed. Marco started to explain to them what they thought happened to Oyaji and anyone else who bothered to wonder why there was more than one brat on the ship, while one of the two Luffys butting in from time to make sound effects or other stupid statements. They'd also started to notice the differences between the two Luffys. The new one, who they dubbed as Other Luffy for the time being, was more laid back and mature. He kept sending glances in Ace's direction as if something bad had happened between the two of them. To be honest, it kind of worried Ace. He knew that he'd never hurt Luffy, no matter what happened. Well, at least not intentionally, but that didn't mean anything about his counterpart. What if? What if it was his counterpart that gave Other Luffy his scar? It was a burn mark after all. A bad one at that. A simple accident wouldn't cause an injury on that scale. And the way he kept looking over at him, like it was physically hurting him just to be around Ace. It unnerved him. Ace wasn't used to receiving a look like that from Luffy, whether from another world or not. All that he'd ever known was looks of love and joy, always curious and always thirsty for adventure. This look of pain, like he'd seen something that he shouldn't, it bothered Ace more than anything. And he was determined to find out what had hurt his little brother, from another dimension or not. They ended up searching the island all day for any signs of how Other Luffy got there and how he could get back. Unfortunately for both parties, they came up with nothing, so Other Luffy was forced to stay the night on the ship. The Whitebeard pirates didn't mind too much, considering that it was Luffy, but at the same time Ace could tell that Thatch was starting to regret not stocking up on the last island. No matter what the differences between the two Luffys were, their appetite never changed. It was soon after that when everyone started heading back to his or her beds to turn in for the night. Luffy had bounced to his division's sleeping quarters, a giant smile on his face as he hollered a cheerful, "Good night," to everyone. The other Luffy had been put in a spare room for the time being, but he didn't seem to mind too much. He did mention that it wouldn't be like sleeping with his nakama, but otherwise didn't say a thing. So Ace thought it was safe to say he was surprised when he went out on deck for his watch duty, only to find Other Luffy leaning over the rail, watching the ocean as it crashed against the ship's hull. Slowly, Ace approached the boy as if not to startle him. Of course, it didn't work when Ace put a hand on his shoulder and the other Luffy flinched, spinning around and facing Ace, his eyes wide. The same hurt expression flashed on his face before it disappeared and everything returned to normal. "Oh. It's you, Ace." He forced a grin. "You surprised me." "Sorry," Ace said, leaning against the railing. He glanced at Other Luffy for a second. "Is it okay if I sit here?" After seeing Luffy's nod, he grinned, sliding down to the wooden floor. He was happy to see that Other Luffy slid down with him, looking up at the stars. "What you thinking about?" "My nakama," Luffy answered simply, though his words sounded shocked. That, Ace decided, was it. Grabbing the boy's shoulders, he spun him around so black met gray and Ace narrowed his eyes. "Tell me." Other Luffy would know exactly what he was talking about. "Ace," Other Luffy looked up, gazing at the stars. He had a small, almost weak smile on his lips that definitely looked out of place. It looked like he was lost in a sea of memories. "You died." And all those differences suddenly made sense. Ace sputtered for a second, his eyes wide. He expected some sort of betrayal. Something normal pirates all the time. But for him to die? No, he wasn't worried about the whole dying part. He was worried about the fact that he probably made a stupid-ass decision and he left Luffy alone. Other Luffy glanced up at him, that same, painful look on his face. "I was surprised when you suddenly appeared in the forest. Thought I was dreaming for a second. But then you guys tried to attack me and well, I didn't know what to do. My dead older brother suddenly shows up, claiming that he's been looking for me, so I panicked." "How?" Ace swallowed, closing his eyes. "How did I die?" Other Luffy hummed. "Protecting me." It was silent for a second as Ace processed the worlds in his mind. Then he snorted, because, really, what else could he do? "Sounds like something I do." "Yeah," Other Luffy trailed off, a small smile appearing on his face. "You and Sabo were always protecting me when I was little. From Great Terminal to the animals in the jungle, you guys were really strong. I promised Shanks that I'd become Pirate King, so I was always trying to catch up with you, but I never once beat you guys in a fight." He paused, his smile fading a bit. "Then Sabo died. It was sad, but we eventually were forced to get over it and set out to become pirates when we were 17. Ace left 3 years earlier cuz he was older than me, so I was left on the island to train. Then I left, gathered my crew, and now, here I am. He glanced over at Ace. What about you? Other me said that he'd grown up here. Ace chuckled at that. Marco, Thatch and I found Lou when he was 4, alone on an island. Found out a couple years back that he was thrown overboard on a ship when Garp tried to take him away from his dad. Don't really know how he survived though. He's basically been with us since he could remember, always causing trouble, getting into things that he shouldn't. He's a real pain in the ass, but he's our little brother. Oyaji made him a commander only a little while ago. He's got his own division now. Course, he still can't do the paperwork or reports to save his life, but he's getting better. That sounds nice. Having a family like that, other Luffy grinned. The only thing close I had to a family is Dayton in Garp, and they're not really a good family. But you've got your Nakama. Ace argued, looking over at the boy. Aren't they your family? My Nakama are more than my family. Other Luffy looked distant, like he was thinking about all the good times they shared. They're special. Oh, really? Ace grinned. Tell me about them. And with a smile on his face, other Luffy did. Damn, Ace. Izo said as the two little monsters ran around the deck, playing a rubber version of tag. I can't see how you put up with this all morning. Ace just laughed as he watched his Luffy crash, headfirst into Oyaji's knee, closely followed by his counterpart. They both bounced back up, laughing, and quickly resuming their game, running around Jozu in circles. They were bothering Thatch most of the morning. Other Luffy just about had a fit when he found out Thatch was a cook. Izo snorted. At least they're still in character. He paused. You'd think Brat number 2 would be more worried about finding a way to get home, not hopping around the deck. Ace just shrugged, an easygoing grin on his face. He's Luffy. The brat can't be worried about anything important to save his life. The crossdresser chuckled. True, true. Oyaji. A very familiar voice rang through the deck, causing anyone that heard to sigh and shake his or her heads. Whitebeard chuckled, putting down his sake cup on the ground next to his chair just in time for a warm body to crash into him and a unique laugh to echo around deck. Story? Whitebeard patted Luffy's small head, looking over the boy to see his counterpart standing in front of him, eyebrow raised. He laughed again and patted the spot on his other thigh. A clear sign that he wanted the other to join him. Other Luffy broke out into his normal grin and quickly clambered up his body, settling right next to his counterpart. Let's see now. Whitebeard racked his memories, not wanting to upset the two young brats. Have I ever told you about the time? After all, what type of father would he be if he couldn't even watch after the youngest? There's this one bastard that I've hated for a while now, other Luffy said, talking to Ace and Luffy on deck. They were sitting in a small circle, exchanging stories and adventures that they'd had over the years. He's a piece of shit. He's part of the reason you D. The other Luffy stopped abruptly and shook his head. Ace didn't have to hear the whole word to know what he was talking about. He died. It was still sore on his mind, knowing that he basically left everyone. From what other Luffy had told him, he was still a part of this crew and was still division commander. So that meant that not only had his counterpart left his little brother, but also adoptive family. It made Ace sick to think about. Actually, other Luffy seemed to be racking his brain, thinking about something. I think he came from this crew. What? Ace questioned, thinking that he hadn't heard the boy right. Yeah, other Luffy nodded, like he was getting surer of his statement. Ace told me that someone betrayed them and killed a friend of his. I don't know all the details, but Ace was really upset. He went to hunt down the bastard, but he underestimated his strength and, well, you know the rest. The rest? Luffy still didn't know about Ace's counterpart's fate, and Ace planned to keep it that way. He didn't need his brother to suddenly have an irrational fear of him dying. Nothing, Lou. Ace ruffled the boy's hair, but he was still obviously upset. He glanced up, meeting other Luffy in the eyes. Who the hell is this guy? Other Luffy blinked. I don't know the name that he went by when he was a Whitebeard pirate, but he goes by Blackbeard now. He's an asshole. The epithet sounded familiar, but Ace couldn't quite place where it came from. He would no doubt start to search, though. If there was one thing the Whitebeards didn't take kindly, it was betrayal. I'll keep an eye out for him. Thanks. Other Luffy tried to give him a fake grin. I don't want you guys to experience the same pain that we have. Ace would make sure of that. You guys ready? Marco hollered to the small group that had gathered in order to help other Luffy find his way home. They'd found some ruins on the farther side of the island, near the place that the two Luffys had ran into each other. They decided that this was probably their best lead and set out as soon as they could. Both Luffys laughed at Marco, while Ace and Thatch gave a thumbs up. Haruta, for her part, just rolled her eyes and Jozu didn't do anything, so Ace assumed that Marco took that as a sign that he was ready as well. Alright, let's go. The two rubber idiots immediately rushed ahead of everyone, talking about meat and adventure. Ace wasn't really keen of listening into their conversation, but did butt in whenever something interesting was said. Other Luffy seemed to be telling Luffy some ridiculous thing again. You know that women in snow countries have smooth skin, right? Why would you say that? Haruta decided to butt in, a small grin on her face. Other Luffy blinked at her like she was stupid. Isn't it obvious? Sanji said, when it's really cold, you rub your skin like this. He rubbed his skin as if he were trying to gather warmth. That's how everyone's skin is so smooth. I don't think that's the way it works, Jozu said, a lax smile plastered over his features. Luffy looked confused. Why not? It makes sense. Yeah, his counterpart echoed. You two are idiots, Thatch said, sliding into the conversation as well. Marco, for his part, just chuckled and Ace honestly didn't know whether he should laugh or shake his head at how pathetic they were being right now. What kind of moron told you that in the first place? Haruta asked, shaking her head. Other Luffy grinned at her. He's a cook too. His food is really good. Everything he makes is delicious. Luffy laughed. I really want to meet him. You just want to taste his food, Jozu accused the boy. It was about mid-afternoon when they got to the ruins, standing tall and proud even if they were crumpling to the ground. It really was a beautiful sight to behold, especially for an archaeologist or someone along those lines. The buildings were made out of this rock that glittered in the sun like gold. Ancient carvings were scrawled out on every single flat surface and vines snaked around everything. Robin would like this. Other Luffy commented, and upon the look he received, he elaborated. She likes old stuff like this. You sound like you have an interesting crew. Marco commented, looking around at the marking on the walls. We should probably split up. Look for anything that might give us clues to what happened. But you're the only one who can read what's on the stone, Haruta pointed out. We can read that. How are we supposed to find clues? Just look around for pictures, Marco suggested, and upon seeing other Luffy's curious look, he sighed. I know a lot of old languages, Yoi. This is one that I recognize. Is this the same language that's on a poneglyph? Marco was surprised that the boy even knew what that was. No, he answered. I can't read that language. I haven't met anyone who can read the language in a long time. Robin can read it, other Luffy said, smiling. It's her dream. Luffy laughed. I have a friend named Robin that's like that too. Except she couldn't join us yet cause she said she had to complete her dream. But, she said that she'd join us if I could find her again. As fascinating as this is, Jozu said, we should probably look around before it gets dark. Luffy immediately grabbed his counterpart, dragging him in the opposite direction as everyone else. We're going on an adventure, he called out. Marco sighed, running his hands through his hair. Really, he should expect something like this to happen. They were Luffy after all. Hey! Other Luffy trailed off, looking in the direction of a rather large pillar that stuck up from the ground only a few hundred meters from the group that they'd been with before. There was something weird about it. Like it was drawing them towards it. Do you feel that? Luffy hummed, walking towards the pillar. Yeah, you think that this is what brought you here? I think so, other Luffy answered, though he didn't sound quite sure. One moment he was exploring an island similar to this. The next he finds himself in front of his supposedly not dead brother. He wasn't paying attention to details then. Luffy broke out into a giant grin, grabbing his hand and pulling him along. Then, let's go check it out. Other Luffy gladly returned the grin. Sure. The closer they got to the pillar, the warier they became. Their smiles were soon gone, replaced by thin lines. This pillar. There was definitely something wrong about it. While everything in these ruins seemed to be dead or non-living, the pillar almost seemed to be alive. Like it was the center of the forest, its roots. This is it. Other Luffy said, 100% sure by now. This is the reason I'm here. Luffy just blinked. Then should you go up and touch it or something? He paused, a grin spreading on his face. Maybe it'll give up meat. Other Luffy snickered. I hope so, but I'm going to touch it, just in case. So he carefully snuck up to the pillar and placed his hands on the smooth surface. He could feel the ridges of the words below his fingers, comforting him for some odd reason. It was quiet for a second and other Luffy was worried for a second that it didn't work when everything suddenly went black. Ace didn't expect Luffy to return so soon and he certainly didn't expect him to come back alone. So when his Luffy barreled through the trees, grinning like an idiot, alone, he knew something was up. Hey, Lou. The teen bounded right up to him, a happy smile on his face. Where's your twin? Luffy hummed for a second. Well, he found this really weird pillar and it felt really weird too, so other me went up and touched it and he disappeared. Well, that was simple. Ace could only hope that other Luffy was sent back to his world and not stuck in yet another dimension. Well, at least it wouldn't be their problem anymore. Oi! Haruta suddenly jogged into Sai, followed by the rest of the group. What happened? We heard a big racket so we came. She glanced at Luffy and noticed something was missing. Hey, Luffy, where's your twin? She. Luffy laughed. Ace said the same thing. We found this pillar and other me touched it and poof, he disappeared. Did this pillar happen to feel like it was alive? Marco asked suddenly, blue eyes narrowed. And did it have a different kind of writing on it, not like the writing found on the stones in the ruins? Luffy giggled again, his arms going around Ace's neck and Ace found himself giving out a free piggyback ride. I dunno about the writing because I didn't pay attention to that but it was really big, it felt weird, too. Marco sighed in relief. That's good, Yoi. That pillar is, according to the people who lived here before, the pillar of the roots. It connects everything on this island together, including other worlds. The other you just happened to get caught up in it by accident. Really? Luffy grinned. That's so cool, so if I go touch it, then can I go to his world or something? You're not going to touch it, Luffy. Jozu said, shaking his head. We've had enough otherworld crap for the time being. We don't want to have to hunt you down. It was silent for a while until Thatch decided to break it. Well, he ventured, a grin setting on his face. Since this problem is resolved, who wants to party? It was almost 1 in the morning when Teach boarded the Moby again, after a day out in the woods. Bodies were everywhere out on deck, probably passed out from alcohol. Only a few were still up and even less were in the right state of mind. Teach raised an eyebrow. He was only gone a day, what reason did they have to party? Knowing the Whitebeard pirates, it was probably for something stupid, but it still bothered him knowing that something happened without him being there to watch. Teach quickly spotted Thatch coming his way and he grinned, offering a small wave in greeting. Once Thatch got to him, the brunette threw an arm around his shoulder and laughed, obviously drunk. Hey ya, Teach, where the hell were you, you bastard? Just exploring the island, Commander Thatch. He answered, did I miss something important? Hell yeah. The 4th Division commander slurred. There was this thing and He trailed off, muttering illegible things. I'm going to bed now. Thatch dropped to the ground, happily asleep. Above him, Teach grinned. Good night, then, Commander Thatch. There was no light. Shadows were everywhere, like a black hole, endless and deadly. They danced around him, jeered at him without making a sound. They grinned, laughing as the sound bounced off the walls, reverberating throughout the whole space of complete nothingness. There was no one around, no one to help. The darkness was suffocating, slowly grabbing the bits of his sanity and yanking it away, dragging it down like a monster from hell. Even if he screamed, begged, cried, there was no one there to save him from this endless land of suffering. And it scared Luffy. He didn't know how he got here, didn't know why. The last thing he remembered was waking up with the blazing smiles of his family above him, cheering for some odd reason. They'd told him about the attack, about his coma, how much worry it caused them. He'd felt bad, he really did, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. He remembered Ace sitting next to him, chatting away with this little smile on his face like he'd gotten just what he'd wished for on his birthday. He remembered the sudden feeling of drowsiness, then a nurse leaning over and pushing him back on his bed, urging him to sleep. After that, everything faded. Normally, he would assume something like this was a dream, but there wasn't any meat. No meat meant that this couldn't be just some simple dream. Maybe he was dead? He was a pirate, after all. He'd heard Marines scream at him thousands of times that no matter what they did, pirates were destined to fall back in the pits of hell that they'd crawled up from, and so maybe this was, in fact, hell. It would make a lot of sense, eternal torture. But Luffy never remembered dying. He thought that for sure he'd remember something like that. He'd always imagined that he'd die in a great battle, fighting till the last breath to protect his nakama, to protect his family. To die in his sleep, well, it was a little disappointing to say the least. This was assuming, of course, that he was dead in the first place. Luffy sighed, his breathing coming out as a white wisp and then dissipating. He ran his hand through his hair and spun on his heels, trying to get a bearing on where he was. His directional sense might not have been great, but it was enough that he could get around if needed. Here, however, there was absolutely nothing. He debated whether or not to take a step forward, not knowing if it was ground beneath him or just darkness, but after a while, the boy rolled his eyes and decided that it was now or never, so he took a step forward. It was a mistake. Immediately he found himself falling into a dark abyss, unable to see the bottom. He let out a startled yelp, his eyes widening as he spun around, desperately trying to right himself so he wouldn't land on something important. He wasn't particularly worried, though. He was rubber, after all. He just didn't know what to expect once he hit the ground. Monsters, Marines, his nakama, meat. He landed seconds later, his back slamming onto the cold, hard ground. He bit back a cry as pain erupted throughout his body. Breathing heavily, he closed his eyes and just lay there for a minute, trying to calm himself down. He'd be expecting a lot of things, but pain was not quite one of them. It was a fall, not that far down, so his devil fruit ability should have worked, shouldn't have? He'd never remembered falling and actually being hurt. Laughter echoed through the darkness, causing Luffy's eyes to snap open and immediately sit up, holding back a hiss of pain when it exploded in his back. The laughter, cold and heartless, continued, sending chills up Luffy's spine. It sounded familiar, but at the same time this was different, darker. Just where had he heard it before? Something moved to his left and Luffy jumped to his feet. Injured or not, he wasn't going to just lie down without a fight. The last thing he'd want to do was nothing. The thing moved again, closer this time. It was like it was slowly cornering him, almost like a small animal. Luffy wasn't used to playing the part of the prey and sure as hell didn't like it. More laughter was heard, and the sound of footstep approaching had Luffy more on edge. Something large moved right in front of him, and Luffy let out an instinctive growl, fist ready. The figure was big, far bigger than himself but not as massive as Oyaji. It laughed, stopping only a few feet away. Luffy wanted to back up, but found his feet sucked to the ground, almost like glue. He shot a desperate look around him, his instincts screaming at him to get the hell away from there, but there was no place to hide in this dark abyss. Luffy glanced back at the figure, almost horrified to see that it was moving again. It walked towards him, slow and deliberate, knowing that Luffy was completely helpless. It squatted centimeters from his face so that Luffy could already smell its foul breath. Its mouth twitched and Luffy flinched away, afraid. However, he did not expect the blinding white smile, perfectly evil, to be the next thing he saw. It's time, Mugiwara. Ace was on duty when he heard the cry and was up, running towards the infirmary before he himself understood what had happened. He knew exactly where he needed to go. After all, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was a common occurrence. He quietly pushed the infirmary door open, poking his head in. He couldn't see anything other than completely darkness. The sound of heavy breathing reached his ears and he cautiously squeezed his body through the door, whispering out, "Luffy? You awake?" "I'm awake." Luffy's voice answered back, sounding different, almost. "I'm going to turn the lights on, okay?" When there wasn't a reply, Ace sneaked in the room, his hand groping the wall, searching for that small white box. He flicked on the lights, letting the room be illuminated even in the dead of night. Luffy flinched and with a hiss, pulled his covers over his head in a sad attempt to block out the glow. Ace cracked a small smile and shook his head at the pitiful attempt. He quietly shut the door behind him, hopeful not to wake any of his crewmates that lived in this wing. He reached the bed, plopping down right beside his little brother and almost pushed him off the bed when the ass didn't move to make room for him. Shaking his head slightly, Ace took a seat next to the bed so he could try and comfort Luffy. The only problem was Luffy hated being like this. Absolutely dependent on everyone with almost no energy to do anything for himself. He was weak and helpless and everyone knew it. So providing comfort wasn't very easy for the stubborn teenager. The fire user sighed. Bad dream. Luffy quietly hummed, letting out a sigh as his body relaxed a minuscule amount. Yeah, I guess. Ace reached out to rub the younger's back in a comforting manner, occasionally running his hands through the boy's hair. We're going to land on the next island tomorrow. It's not like I can go anywhere. Luffy whined. Physical therapy was a bitch like that. Luffy wasn't recovering anytime soon. I'll bring back souvenirs. You're laughing at me. Luffy complained with a huff. I'm not. Yes, you are. Ace quickly put a hand over his little brother's mouth, glancing around the room. Shush. I'm not supposed to be in here, idiot. You're going to get me caught. Good. That's not good, I am trying to help. Ace was quickly interrupted by Luffy. Don't you have watch duty tonight? I do. Then you should probably get back on deck before someone catches you. Ace groaned, tightening his hold on the boy. He didn't want to go yet, at least, not until he was sure Luffy was better. As if reading his brother's mind, Luffy made a small whining noise at the back of his throat. I'm fine, Ace. You're being irrational, now. Says you. Ace shot back, but let his arms slide back to his sides and pushed off the bed. He glanced back at Luffy, one eyebrow raised. Are you sure you're alright? Because I can get? Ace. Okay. Ace waved his hand up in the air, waking toward the door. OS fingers hovered over the light switch. You sure you don't want to talk about it? Even from as far away Ace is, he could tell how uncomfortable Luffy was. Eventually, the commander shook his head and sighed. Maybe someday but not right now. Night, Ace. Ace echoed the sigh. Good night, Luffy. I call bullshit, Shanks had declared, loudly, the moment Mihawk had showed him the latest newspaper. Even after numerous attempts of trying to convince the red-headed captain that maybe Luffy had died, he still stood strong with unwavering determination. Luffy has a promise to keep. Anchor wouldn't just give up like that. Yeah, one crew member said, but he was facing a Kainu. That guy is overly sadistic and really damn strong. Even someone like Luffy would have trouble. The Whitebeards wouldn't let something like that happen. Shanks glared at the man, his arms crossed over his chest. He stood firm, his trusting. Even though they argued, the crew knew that there was nothing they could do to convince their captain otherwise. But, sometimes, accidents, we're going to call Whitebeard, Shanks declared, suddenly, pushing himself off the ground and brushing his pants off. And I'm going to show you asses that I'm right. Anchor's not dead yet. Ben frowned up at the red-headed man. Captain, I'm not taking sides on this, but are you sure you want to talk to Whitebeard? They might not take kindly to that after everything that's happened. Don't care, was the only reply he got. We're calling, now. Well, this is upsetting, don't you think, Eustace Yaw? Trafalgar Law looked up from the newspaper that he was reading, a sadistic grin set on his face. His ally didn't spare him a glance, completely set on tinkering with his metal object. Eustace Yaw, are you ignoring me? I'm hurt. The brute only snarled. Piss off, demon doctor. I have better things to do than listen to your stupid ass voice. I prefer Surgeon of Death. Trafalgar's voice was smooth, almost cocky, and that goddamn smirk. The man was driving Kid close to insanity. You don't even know what I was going to say. I don't care. Leave me alone. You need to have your attitude checked on, was the snippy reply. Besides, don't you remember our little friend, Mugiwara? Law's smirk only grew when Kid paused with his fiddling, looking up with an eyebrow raised. The Whitebeard commander. Law chuckled. Yes, him. He tossed the paper at his ally. Seems like it was a one-time meeting. What are you talking about? Oh, Kid frowned at the headline, glaring at Law. He's dead. Law heaved a dramatic sigh, leaning his face into his hand. It's disappointing, really. I was looking forward to seeing him again, but it looks like the Marines got to him before we could. Kid's eyebrow twitched. Before you could. I want nothing to do with your sick mind. You're a very harsh man, Eustace Yaw. Why won't you just leave me alone? Robin was never one to believe in lies, and the moment she saw that newspaper, She knew it wasn't true. He'd promised her that he'd come and find her. He couldn't be dead, not when he was the only thing that was keeping her alive. She heard clumsy footsteps behind her, but she didn't turn around to know who it was. It was just her, boss, probably drunk again. He was a stupid man but had a good heart, though that just made it easy for Robin to make a living. As long as these strangers remained ignorant to whom she really was, then she would be fine. What you got to her, Ben? Yes, it was definitely her boss, and he was definitely drunk. If she hadn't been around him for a while, she would have found his speech very hard to understand, but she could decipher the drunken slur rather easily now. A newspaper, she replied, wiping all facial expressions off of her face. Oh. His words seemed to drag on forever. "S the unbowed dem whitebeard shits?" Yes, she replied, but that was all the information she was giving him. Don't believe that bullshit. Her boss informed her. Whitebeards wouldn't let a mander go down without a fight. Brat's still alive. She turned to look at him, letting confusion slip. Do you know them? Met him one before, he cackled, walking towards the door that he entered. Back when I old walk in a straight line. Protective, unch they are. You'd have FTA have an army talk kill one of them. The boy is alive, so quit Warren, you'll scare off the customers. She gave the man a small smile. Thank you. Yay, yay. Get out of here and head back to work. He slammed the door shut, leaving Robin alone once again. You know, I found a devil fruit today, Lou. Thatch grinned, ruffling the boy's hair. Luffy laughed, shaking Thatch's hand off and demanding an explanation since he wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Back when we were exploring the island. It was a winter island, too. There's a whole bunch of snow on the ground. We found it just lying there, in the snow. It stuck out like a sore thumb. Purple and swirly. I'll have to show you it later since I don't have it with me. Are you going to eat it? Luffy questioned, tilting his head to the side. They taste gross. So, I've heard. Thatch laughed. But I'm not sure. I dunno if I want to lose my ability to swim in case you decide to jump overboard again. He ignored Luffy's pout. Besides, we don't even know what it does yet. It could be something stupid, like rubber. Hey, Luffy protested, seemingly offended. Rubber's the best. I could kick your ass. Yeah. I'm just teasing you. He chuckled when Luffy started pouting, arms crossed. Geez, you're being a baby. I'm not. Yes, you are. Thatch poked him on the nose, then looked at the time and sighed. As much as he'd like to stay, he had other stuff he needed to get done. I've gotta go, squirt. Commander duties and all. See y'all later. Okay, I'll bring the fruit next time. Luffy grinned up at the cook. Okay, bye Thatchy. Thatch only grinned before shutting the door, a smile still on his face. Luffy was doing better, that much was obvious, but he could barely walk. He took his first steps for the first time in months just 2 days ago. The man shook his head. Luffy would get back up, eventually, but for now he just needed to lie down and rest. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't notice someone standing in his way until he bumped into them, sending them both back a few feet. Thatch blinked, looking up and grinned when he recognized the man. Oh, Teach. Sorry about that. I didn't see you there. No, Teach gave Thatch a dark grin, one that the commander had never seen before. I was looking for you, actually. Oh, really? What you need? Nothing, the man replied. Just saying congratulations on finding that devil fruit. They're pretty rare, you know. Oh, Thatch brightened up a bit. Yeah, I was pretty lucky. Have you seen it yet? Teach laughed, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was dark, almost sinister. Nothing like how the man would laugh on a normal day, and it was quite honestly scaring him. Oh yes, Commander Thatch. Believe me, I've seen it. And then the man lumbered off, leaving Thatch alone once again. It was cold that night, lonely and kind of scary. The infirmary was quiet. So quiet that he could hear the sounds of the waves crashing against the massive hull. Luffy didn't know what time it was, nor did he really care. All he knew was that it was dark and he didn't like it. The shadows danced on the walls like there was some hidden tune that he couldn't hear. He shrunk back into his pristine white bed, pulling the covers just a bit higher to cover his nose. Luffy shuddered, closing his eyes and tried to calm the queasy feeling in his gut. It felt like it did back when he was just a little kid when someone decided to attack Oyaji's ship. The only difference was there were no shouts, no explosions, no war cries, and no one to comfort him. No Ace. No Marco. No one. He was alone. Just like all those years ago, back when he could barely form a coherent thought, living alone on an island full of animals that could eat him with barely any effort. For a while, Luffy contemplated on going to wake up Ace, but quickly decided not to because his older brother had night watch last night and needed his sleep. Ace had distracted him enough already and he didn't want the grown man worrying about him any more than he had to. Ace already had to worry about his division, just as Luffy had to worry about his. Anything else at this point would just be unreasonable and a burden. He sighed, watching as his breath comes out as a white mist. It really was cold tonight. If they were lucky, then, maybe they'd end up with some snow soon. Luffy opens his eyes and smiled because even if it wasn't much comfort, it was all that he had. He starts to close his eyes again, his fatigue finally starting to catch up with him. He's almost asleep when he hears a quiet thump and a hiss of pain and, suddenly, he's sitting straight up in his bed, staring at the door. There's someone outside muttering under their breath, but Luffy couldn't understand them nor could he recognize the voice. The person's footsteps then started up again, this time away from his door, and Luffy let out a breath that he didn't know he was holding. There was something off, though Luffy couldn't quite place it. There was only one person on watch tonight, Izo, but the man was very adamant about staying on his post and not moving, so there was almost no way it could be him. It wasn't like the infirmary was anywhere near the kitchen either, so who would go out of their way to come all the way over here? The boy drew back his covers, throwing his legs carefully over the side of the edge of the bed. He's tried to be as careful as possible so he wouldn't aggravate his already healing wounds. He put one foot down, hissing when he finds out the floor is colder than he originally thought, but pushed the discomfort out of his mind and walked to the door. It was slow, partially because he was still getting used to walking and partly because he was already sore from physical therapy that morning. It frustrated him to no end how helpless he was. If the ship was attacked again, he wouldn't even be able to run. Luffy paused, hand hovering on the handle before pushing it open and poking his head out to check the hallway. He tried to keep the relief from his features when he saw no one was there. He heard talking a bit further down the hallway. A light from the room is illuminating the otherwise dark and dreary place. Luffy's stomach started to drop, but he ignored it in favor of quickening his pace, leaning heavily against the wall. The light is coming from Thatch's room, though why anyone would be up at this ungodly hour is a bit strange. The whispering gets louder, coming from inside the room. The commander snuck up, seeing the door cracked just a bit, and peeked his head in. There were two people in there, one large and covered in black clothing and the other was Thatch, his hand reaching for a sword that was just a little out of his grasp. They're talking about something but Luffy couldn't tell what they were saying. "Commander Thatch, this is the only time I will ask again." Luffy stopped, quickly recognizing the voice. Teach. He tried to get a better view of the two, but couldn't move without alerting both of the men in the room. "You have some nerve." Thatch's voice is colder than ice. "Threatening a commander? I thought you had more respect, Teach." Luffy held in a shiver. He'd never heard Thatch that serious, not even when they're attacked or someone is hurt. He has absolutely no idea what was going on, but he knew it was about to get ugly really fast. Luffy tensed up, seeing the large figure. Teach, moving faster than Luffy had ever seen, grabbing Thatch's sword from his hands in a swift movement and pointing it at the commander. Thatch growled, eyes narrowed. Luffy had to hold in a cry of outrage, knowing that it would only get them both killed. He had to go tell someone fast because he was in no shape to fight, let alone battle someone who could easily have the strength of a commander. He's about to run back and tell Izo, but soon stopped as he watched what happened next. Teach sighed like he'd expected the outcome. "And here I thought you had some common sense, Commander Thatch. What a shame." "The hell?" There was a cry of pain and Luffy's eyes widened in terror. Teach lunged to stab Thatch, but the seasoned commander was too quick and the fat man only ended up slicing his shoulder. Teach snarled like a wild animal, jumping at Thatch and pinning him to the ground. Thatch struggled for a second but couldn't escape the hold in time for Teach to raise the sword, flying down towards Thatch's exposed back. "Don't." Luffy couldn't take it anymore, throwing the door open and racing towards Thatch. But it was too late. The sword entered his back, and Thatch let out a cry of pain before going completely still. Luffy managed to lunge at Teach and throw him off, but knew that it had done no good. The man simply grabbed him by the neck and threw him on the ground next to Thatch. Luffy bit his tongue to keep from crying out as his old injuries protested violently. Luffy glanced towards Thatch at his side, swallowing the bile in his throat as the blood started to pool around the man's body. You. A sword is pointed at his neck and Luffy didn't have time to finish his sentence. Ah, Teach sounded only mildly surprised. You weren't supposed to hear that, little Luffy. You should have been asleep. Luffy's eyes narrow and he draws his lips into a snarl. He spat at the man's feet, blood dripping down the side of his face. Traitor. I should kill you. Teach said, nonchalantly, like this wasn't the first time he's thought of that. It would make things easier, but I'm not going to. The sword is pushed further into his neck, enough to draw blood. I have what I need, so I will take my leave now. I don't want to be caught in the chaos when everyone else finds you. I can imagine that you won't be in very good shape by the end of this. Bastard. Luffy snarled as loud as he could, hoping that someone might hear him. He goes to attack Teach to buy some time, but the sword is only pushed harder against his throat. Don't move, brat. Teach said calmly, though his eyes are narrowed, and before Luffy can even react, the sword is raised and slicing his chest. Luffy can't even hold in the scream as pain assaulted his senses, and he arches his back before thumping back to the ground, panting harshly. Good boy, it's like this is a fucking game to him. Now, you're going to stay right there while I make my escape, alright? The sword is raised again, and this time it's his legs that are attacked. A sword right through his foot. He bit his lip hard enough to draw blood. He knew the bastard did that so he couldn't run and tell everyone. It made him sick. His senses were fading and he knew that he doesn't have much time before he's unconscious, or worse. He gasped. His vision is fuzzy, but he can just make out the figure of Teach walking out the door, a little box in his hand. He tried to control his breathing, but he knew it wasn't working. He can't move any of his body. I feel like they're on fire. Help! He cried out, hoping someone could hear him. He can't tell how loud his voice is or if he's even talking at all. Someone help us. His throat burned and he knew that he couldn't say anymore. His sight was almost completely gone and his hearing was fuzzy, but he could have sworn that he heard footsteps running down the halls and someone calling his name before everything faded away. Ace makes an effort not to look at the bloodstain on the deck. He leans against the rail, ignoring everyone that passes by him. He doesn't acknowledge those that try to approach him, doesn't look at them, doesn't speak. His hands grip the rail tight, stubbornly looking out at the ocean. The lights from deck reflect and dance along the tops of the waves. He shivers, closing his eyes. Betrayal. The words leave a bitter taste in his mouth. Ace thought that his nakama were his family. They had eaten together, they had drank together, they had fought together, they had lived together. Apparently Marshal D. Teach had other ideas. Ace forces his eyes open, letting out a shaky breath of air. This past year had been rough on them all, from Akanyu's attack to Luffy's coma. Ace had thought that it couldn't get any worse. He was wrong. He was so wrong. We're all worried, you know. Marco's voice comes from behind him. Ace doesn't even turn around. Thatch isn't dead yet. Luffy will be fine. God, Marco, Ace chokes out. He doesn't know what to say. How can he convey so many emotions into simple words? Could he spit out all of his worries and fears? His words were failing him. He doesn't trust himself not to fuck everything up and make it worse. A comforting hand is placed on his shoulder. Ace tenses, lowering his head. He doesn't want pity. He just wants his family to be okay. They're strong, Marco says, his voice low and gentle. I know, Ace says, because he does. His brothers were the strongest out there. A million thoughts were swirling around his head. He glances up at Marco only to see familiar blue eyes staring down at him. Have a little faith, Ace. Ace is going to respond. He really is. But a small white fleck captures his attention. He looks away from Marco and back out to the sea, captivated and horrified at the same time. Oh, Marco says. It's snowing. Snow. Thatch's voice echoes in his head. If I die, I want to die when it's snowing. Fuck, Ace thinks. Luffy wakes up to a major headache and a roomful of commanders mingling by his bed. He blinks. Once, twice, trying to process what exactly was going on. He tries to sit up, but pain races up his back and forces him back into the bed. The infirmary, his mind provides. He was in an infirmary bed. The other commanders take notice of his movement and cry out happily as they swarm him. Questions are shot out faster than he can process, and it doesn't stop until Ace weasels his way through the crowd and pushes them back. Hey, let him breathe. Luffy, Izo calls. Thank God. We were so worried. After we found you and Thatch. Izo's voice catches in his throat and the other commanders look down. Thatch. Luffy's eyes widen. The events of that night come rushing back to him. Teach, the devil fruit, Thatch. Just what had happened? Thatch. Luffy's voice cracks at the end. He feels horrible, like he'd been fed to a sea king and thrown back up. Which was not fair because he was the one supposed to be eating the sea cane. Marco pushes through the crowd, eyes soft. He places a hand on Luffy's shoulder. Thatch, he pauses and Luffy holds his breath. Thatch is alive. And just like that, Luffy could breath again. He's hurting, Marco continues. Teach did a number on him, but he should be fine. He woke up a little while ago. Was asking about you the entire time. You two scared us, Haruta says, grinning enthusiastically. Jozu huffs and rolls his eyes. A few of the other commanders chime in with their agreement. Everyone, Luffy says, a wide grin coming to his face. His words are barely louder than a whisper. Thank you. Things were smooth after that. Well, as smooth as a pirate's life can get. Luffy was now 19. Almost 20 years old, and Ace could not be prouder. He could tell Marco and Thatch were as well. Thatch even cried as they sung happy birthday for his 19th birthday party. His little brother had grown. And for once, Ace wasn't worried for the future. They'd face it head on, just like always. They were a family after all. The island was decimated. Completely and utterly destroyed. Shanks knows this. He had caused part the destruction after all. And even as yet another tree falls in the wake of the fight, Shanks could not be any prouder. Luffy had defeated him. Their fight had gone on for forever. The others had grown tired of watching after a while and had returned to their respective ships. Shanks himself was exhausted. His entire body ached and he was struggling to keep his eyes open. He finds himself on his knees, staring at the ground. There's a grin on his face as he clutches his bleeding stomach. Anchor fought well. Not just well but amazing. Amazing enough to beat a Yonko. For a second, Shanks sees an image of a small boy with a bandage under his eyes proudly declaring, I will defeat you. Defeat him, he had. The click-clack of sandals startles the red-haired man out of his stupor. He glances up, only to see straw flip-flops just mere inches away from his face. Shanks wheezes out a laugh. You're full of surprises, aren't you, Luffy? The boy laughs, but doesn't reply. Shanks shakes his head fondly, or as much as he can. Everything hurts. What do you fight for, Luffy? There is absolutely no hesitation. I fight for my family. Shanks laughs again. He can feel his body shutting down. The edges of his vision were blurring. His hands shoot out and use the ground to steady himself. Good, good. I fight for mine as well. Luffy doesn't respond to this either, and for a while, there is silence. Until Shanks dimly makes out the shuffling of Luffy's feet and suddenly he feels a familiar weight on his head. Oh, I will defeat you one day, Shanks. You said to return this to you when I defeated you. There is pride in Luffy's voice. Well, you've been defeated. Shanks laughs some more. He couldn't stop his grin if he tried, so I have. Silence is there once again. Only Shanks' wheezing breath could be heard. He hears Luffy move around again and cracks open his eyes. When had he closed them? Only to see Luffy walking away. Back towards his home. Back towards his family. Shanks. Luffy suddenly calls out, turning and giving him the widest grin imaginable. Thank you. Anytime, Anchor. Shanks whispers. And later, when Luffy turns up without a straw hat on his head, no one is surprised. Robin. The call echoes around her and Robin stops because she knows that voice. She's barely given any warning before a body is slammed into hers and both are sent tumbling to the ground. The figure that had smashed into her was laughing, and for some reason, some weird, unknown reason, Robin didn't feel threatened by the voice. She felt at ease. The body shifts and suddenly there is a face above hers, bright, with a smile that is so familiar. I found you. Luffy grins at her like she's the best thing that's ever happened to him. Robin stops, because out of all the things she expected, this was not on the list. When she doesn't respond, the boy, man, commander, pouts and tilts his head to the side. Don't tell me you forgot our promise. Her brain starts to work again and Robin can only laugh. Never before had relief been so prominent in her system. Never before had she felt this kind of joy. Luffy had remembered their promise. Of course not, she tells him. How could I forget? I found you. The commander repeats happily. Proudly. You can join my family now. I can, Robin answers. Luffy rushes to get off of her, offering her a hand. Together, they get back on their feet and Robin smiles. You're my nakama, Robin, he tells her brightly, my family. Nakama, Robin repeats under her breath. She repeats the word in her head even more. Nakama, nakama, nakama. Family. Without thinking, she throws her arms around and hugs Luffy so tight that she's afraid she might hurt him. Tears start to slip out of her eyes because after so many long years, so many spent in pain, she finally has a home. She finally has a family. So she smiles. She smiles. She can't stop. This was her home now. This was her family. Thank you for finding me. The bond that links a true family is not always one of blood. Luffy's family had grown in the past few years. Chopper, Zoro, Sanji, Robin, Nami, Brook, Frankie, and Uspo. All with different dreams of their own, but fates that intertwined. A family. His family. The Whitebeard pirates were his home, his nakama. He knows this better than anyone. No matter what he was feeling, no matter where he was, he knows he'll always have their support and love. And that, Luffy thinks, is the best feeling in the world. Better than the feeling of eating a delicious meal. And sure, not everything is perfect. There are still enemies. Garp still shows up at annoying times. Oyaji still isn't Pirate King. But they're working on it. Every day they get closer and closer. Every day, the future seems brighter. As long as Luffy has his family by his side, he'll fight forever.